The first warning came from the hounds before any lady in the courtyard dared to speak. Their low growl rolled across the pale stone of Halewick Park like distant thunder, and Miss Viola Fairbourne felt it in her gloved fingers before she allowed herself to breathe. Until that sound, she had been exactly where the Dowager Duchess of Wycliffe preferred her to be. Not absent. Absence could be noticed. Viola had been present in the useful way, standing 3 careful steps behind Lady Octavia Merrow with a folded shawl over one arm, a reticule looped over her wrist, and Octavia's silver-edged calling card case pressed against her palm. She was 24 years old, gently born, poorly provided for, and practiced in the art of becoming furniture whenever greater people wished to arrange their lives. On that April afternoon in 1854, greater people had come to arrange a marriage. Halewick Park had prepared itself accordingly. The great house rose out of the Hampshire green with all the pale authority of old wealth, its stone front washed in spring light, its tall windows catching the sky, its carved entrance watched by footmen in Wycliffe livery. Beyond the gravel sweep lay the south lawn, clipped and shining. Beyond that, a sweep of parkland rolled toward dark oaks and a narrow belt of woodland where Viola had no proper reason ever to have been. She looked toward the woodland only once, and when she did, her fingers closed around the torn riding glove hidden inside her reticule. The glove should have been burned. She had meant to burn it twice. Instead, she had kept it folded beneath a handkerchief, with its split seam and faint brown stain tucked away like a secret that might draw blood again if handled carelessly. "Viola," Lady Octavia murmured without turning her head, "you are crushing the cards." Viola loosened her grip at once. "Forgive me." "Not so loudly. It sounds provincial." Octavia's smile did not move. That was one of her finest accomplishments. She could correct a person with the softness of a harp string and make the wound seem self-inflicted. She stood before the entrance steps in a gown of pale pearl silk, its skirts arranged to catch the sun, her bonnet trimmed with ribbons that matched her gloves precisely. Every detail of her had been chosen for conquest. Her father, the Earl of Merrow, had sent her with a dowry large enough to soothe any hesitation, and the Dowager Duchess had received her as though the future had already signed its name. Viola had come because Octavia required a companion and because the Merrow household had long ago discovered that poor relations were most convenient when they were grateful. "Smile a little," Octavia whispered. "Not as if you are happy. As if you are harmless." Viola let her mouth soften. It was an old obedience. Around them, the receiving party had gathered in elegant fragments. A pair of elderly aunts from a neighboring estate sat beneath the shade of the portico. The rector's wife pretended not to listen while listening to everything. 2 young ladies from the county watched Octavia with the expression of women witnessing a coronation they had not been invited to contest. Near the open doors, Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, directed servants with a glance, while a footman held a tray of lemonade no one wished to drink until the Dowager did. Then the Dowager Duchess of Wycliffe descended the steps. Selina Streetmore was not tall, yet she gave the impression of height because everyone around her seemed to lower themselves without noticing. She wore deep violet silk and a widow's cap edged in black lace, and her face had the composed severity of a portrait that had judged 3 generations and found each one disappointing. She approached Octavia with both hands extended. "Lady Octavia, you brighten Halewick. Your grace is generous." Octavia curtsied with perfect grace. Viola lowered herself a beat later, careful not to draw attention by moving too soon or too late. The Dowager's gaze passed over her. It did not pause. "And Miss Fairbourne," she said at last, as if Viola's name had been written in the margin of a letter. "How kind of you to accompany your cousin. I am honored to be received at Halewick Park, Your Grace." The answer was correct. It was also unnecessary. The Dowager had already turned back to Octavia. "My son has been detained in his study for a few minutes, but he will join us directly. The Duke is not fond of ceremony, though ceremony has been fond of him since birth. We must forgive him that burden." A small ripple of polite amusement moved through the group. Viola lowered her eyes. She knew enough of dukes to know that they were less men than weather. They altered the temperature of rooms before entering them. Alaric Streetmore, Duke of Wycliffe, had the sort of reputation that made mothers lower their voices and daughters lift their chins. Cold. Exacting. Widely respected. Rarely pleased. He had inherited Halewick Park at 22 after his father's sudden death, had settled old debts within a year, dismissed 3 dishonest stewards, refused 2 great heiresses, and made it known that he would not be managed by tears, beauty, or bloodline. Naturally, half of England's marriage-minded families had taken this as a challenge. The Dowager Duchess had taken it as a problem. Lady Octavia Merrow, with her money, rank, and flawless manners, had been brought to Halewick Park as the solution. Viola had been brought to hold the shawl. Miss Fairbourne, the Dowager said, without looking at her, you may stand a little farther back. This is a family discussion, not a companion's curiosity. Silence followed. Not a dramatic silence. Nothing so merciful. It was the small, polished silence of people deciding not to intervene. Viola felt the words strike and settle. Companion. Curiosity. Farther back. She inclined her head. Of course, Your Grace. She stepped back. 1 step. 2. 3 would have placed her beside a footman, so she stopped at 2.5, a compromise no one would reward but which preserved the last inch of her pride. Octavia's mouth curved. The Dowager resumed speaking of the weather, the journey from London, and the beauty of Hampshire in spring. Viola listened because listening had saved her more than once. She learned from what people repeated, what they avoided, and what they believed too obvious to conceal. The Dowager spoke of the Duke's responsibilities. Octavia spoke of duty as if it were a jewel she had ordered in the proper setting. The rector's wife asked whether Lady Octavia enjoyed country life, and Octavia answered that she had always found estates more meaningful than town amusements, provided they were well governed. It was exactly the sort of answer a future duchess should give. Viola would have admired it more had she not heard Octavia complain that morning that Hampshire smelled of wet grass and dogs. Dogs. Viola's fingers moved again toward the reticule. She stopped herself before anyone noticed. The sound of them came faintly from beyond the side archway first, a scrape of paws, a handler's low command, the jingle of a lead. Her throat tightened. She had known the Wycliffe hounds would be at Halewick. Everyone in the county knew of Bracken and Thorn, the Duke's great dark hunting hounds, bred from an old line and said to obey only their master. She had told herself they would be kept near the kennels, away from guests and silk gowns. She had told herself 3 weeks was long enough for an animal to forget the scent of a woman who had knelt in the mud at dusk, torn her glove on a rusted latch, and whispered nonsense while freeing a trembling leg from iron teeth. But the body remembered what the mind tried to fold away. Her wrist gave a ghost of pain beneath the glove. At an upper window, unseen by those below, a man stood in the shadow of the study curtains. Viola did not know he was there. If she had, she might have held herself differently, though perhaps not. The Duke of Wycliffe had left his desk when the first carriage turned onto the sweep. He had watched his mother arrange the afternoon as she arranged flowers, cutting away whatever did not suit the vase. He had seen Lady Octavia step down, bright and composed. He had seen Miss Fairbourne step down after her, carrying what others handed her, accepting no arm, claiming no notice. He had watched the Dowager move her backward with a sentence. He had expected embarrassment. Perhaps resentment. Instead, Miss Fairbourne had merely adjusted her stance as if dignity were a shawl she could draw closer without anyone seeing the motion. That interested him. Very little did. Your Grace, Octavia said below, her voice lifting with pretty anticipation, I understand His Grace keeps 2 remarkable hounds. The Dowager smiled. Indeed. Bracken and Thorn are quite devoted to my son. They are not usually brought forward for guests, but today is not usual. How charming. Octavia's fingers flexed once, just once, in a way only someone behind her could see. Viola saw it. So did the hounds, perhaps, when they came through the side archway into the sun. Bracken was first, broad-chested and black as polished coal, with tan markings above eyes that seemed almost human in their watchfulness. Thorn moved half a pace behind, leaner, scarred faintly at one foreleg, his head low as he tested the air. The kennel boy holding the leads looked anxious, though whether from the dogs or the company, Viola could not tell. The courtyard changed. Even the ladies who disliked animals smiled as if hounds were picturesque when attached to a dukedom. Octavia stepped forward. The Dowager's expression sharpened with satisfaction. This was part of the presentation, then. Not only would Lady Octavia charm the mother and satisfy the family accounts. She would be seen accepted by the old house, the servants, the grounds, even the Duke's beasts. Viola felt the reticule cord bite into her wrist. Thorn lifted his head. His nose worked. Once. Twice. His gaze passed over Octavia and fixed on Viola. No. Please, no. Viola lowered her eyes, as if an animal could be persuaded by etiquette. Do stand still, Octavia breathed. You look strange. Viola stood still. The kennel boy brought the hound closer. Octavia extended one gloved hand, graceful and pale, the very picture of a bride greeting her future household. From somewhere above, from the shadowed study window, the Duke watched without moving. Thorn's body went rigid. Bracken's ears flattened. Then the growl came. Low. Certain. Unmistakable. It moved through the courtyard and stripped the smile from every face. Octavia's hand froze in the air. The Dowager Duchess turned white with fury, though not yet with fear. Viola could not breathe. Thorn had not forgotten. Neither had she. The growl did not rise into a snarl. It did not need to. It held steady in the warm April air, low enough to seem part of the stones beneath their feet, and every person in the courtyard understood that something had gone wrong beyond the reach of politeness. Lady Octavia Merrow kept her hand extended for one more breath, as if confidence alone might command the beasts to remember their place. The pearl ribbon beneath her bonnet stirred faintly. Her smile remained, but Viola, standing 2.5 steps behind, saw the small hardening at the corner of her mouth. Octavia was not frightened first. She was offended. How spirited, Octavia said lightly. I suppose country animals must be allowed their little temperaments. Thorn's growl deepened. The kennel boy's face drained of color. Easy, sir, he whispered, though whether he spoke to Thorn or to the situation, Viola could not tell. Bracken shifted his weight, blocking the boy's knees with his broad body. Thorn did not take his eyes from Octavia's hand. Her fingers had curled slightly, not into a fist, not enough for accusation, but enough to awaken some memory in the animal. Viola saw it and felt a chill that no spring sun could ease. 3 weeks earlier, in the dim strip of woodland beyond the south lawn, Thorn had flinched at just such a motion. Not from her. Never from her. Peter, the Dowager Duchess said, her voice cut thin as glass, control them. The kennel boy swallowed. Yes, your grace. He tightened the leads with trembling care. The hounds obeyed only partly. They did not move toward Octavia, but they did not relax. That refusal, quiet and immovable, did more damage than any leap could have done. Ladies who had leaned forward to admire them now leaned back. The rector's wife clasped her hands at her waist. One of the county girls covered a whisper with her glove. Octavia's father's name, Merrow, seemed to hover above the gathering like a coin being weighed. Dowry could purchase silence, but not quite fast enough. They are badly handled, Octavia said, still smiling. No doubt they know no better. Viola's gaze rose before she could stop it. There it was. The soft cruelty that never sounded like cruelty unless one had lived under it. Peter flushed as if struck by shame. He was perhaps 16, narrow-shouldered, with mud drying at the hem of his coat. His hand tightened on the leather leads. Viola wanted to speak. She wanted to say the hounds were not badly handled, that fear had a smell, that animals remembered what ladies trusted servants to forget. She said nothing. A poor relation who defended a kennel boy against an earl's daughter would not be called compassionate. She would be called insolent. Then the house door opened. No servant announced him. No footman had time. The Duke of Wycliffe stepped onto the upper stair, and the courtyard altered as if every person had drawn a stricter breath. Alaric Streetmore was dressed in dark mourning clothes that made the pale stone behind him seem brighter. He was tall, spare, and composed with an absence of ornament that gave him more consequence than any jewel could have done. His hair was black, his eyes grey, and his face held the controlled stillness of a man who had long ago learned that anger was most useful when kept cold. Bracken's ears lifted at once. Thorn's growl faded, not into trust, but into recognition. The Duke looked first at the hounds. Then at Octavia's suspended hand. Then, briefly and inexplicably, at Viola. She lowered her eyes too late. "Peter," he said. "Loose the tension on the leads." The boy hesitated. "Your Grace, they heard me." Peter obeyed. The leather slackened. Bracken stepped half a pace toward the Duke, but Thorn remained where he was, head low, body held between warning and memory. "Your Grace," the Dowager said, with a brittle smile, "we are all relieved you have come." The dogs appear to have forgotten their training. "No," the Duke said. The single word settled over the stones. Octavia lowered her hand at last. A faint stain of color touched her cheeks. "I fear I startled them, Your Grace. I have always been told animals sense nervousness, though I confess I was not nervous until they took objection to me." It was beautifully done. A small laugh accompanied the words. Enough humility to charm. Enough injury to accuse. The Dowager seized upon it. "Lady Octavia has behaved with admirable grace. Peter, you will take them back at once. I will speak with the kennel master." "You will not," the Duke said. The Dowager turned. For the first time that afternoon, her expression slipped. "Only a fraction. Alaric. No one will punish my hounds for giving warning." Octavia's smile thinned. "Warning, Your Grace." "Yes." The word was calm. It was not soft. A silence opened around it. Viola felt its edges. She had been in rooms where powerful people disguised meaning to preserve comfort. The Duke did the opposite. He removed comfort and left meaning bare. Octavia recovered quickly. "Then perhaps I should be grateful. I must have offended them without knowing how. I hope I'm not to be judged too harshly by creatures I've only just met." "That depends," the Duke said, "on whether they have only just met you." Viola's heart gave one hard beat. Octavia's head turned slightly. Not toward the Duke. Toward Viola. It lasted less than a second, but Viola saw it. So did the Duke. His gaze sharpened, though he said nothing. The Dowager made a soft sound of displeasure. "This has become unnecessarily dramatic. Lady Octavia came to be welcomed, not interrogated by implication. Then we shall return to welcome when I am satisfied there is no reason for alarm." "Alarm?" Octavia repeated, still airy. "Surely Your Grace does not think me a danger to your household." "I think my hounds reacted to something." His eyes moved to Thorn, who had begun to test the air again. "I prefer to know what." Viola wanted to vanish. The wish was old, but this time it came sharpened with fear. Thorn's nose lifted. The wind shifted through the courtyard, carrying scents of damp grass, crushed gravel, horse leather, lemon water, silk, starch, and the faint medicinal trace of the liniment Viola had used on her wrist that morning. She saw the change in the hound before anyone else did. His body loosened. His head turned away from Octavia. Slowly, almost painfully, Thorn looked past her. At Viola. Bracken followed. Peter whispered, "Sir." The hounds moved. Not quickly. Not wildly. That would have been easier to dismiss. They moved with grave purpose, as if they had been released from a question and were going toward the answer. Viola took one step back. Her heel met the edge of the lower stair. The shawl slipped on her arm. Octavia's calling card case pressed cold against her palm. "Do not move," Octavia breathed, no longer smiling. Viola stopped. Bracken came first. He crossed the courtyard with his head lowered, not in threat, but in certainty. Thorn followed, limping so faintly that only someone who knew to look would see it. The ladies under the portico drew in murmured breaths. Peter let the lead slide through his hands, helpless under the Duke's raised palm. The Dowager watched with an expression of gathering fury. Viola could hear her own pulse. She could feel the torn glove hidden in the reticule as if it had grown heavier with every step the hounds took. The Duke descended one stair. He did not call them back. That was the worst of it. He was watching. Everyone was watching. Bracken reached Viola and stopped close enough that his shoulder brushed the hem of her plain traveling gown. Thorn lowered his nose to her right wrist. The glove. Of course it would be the glove. Viola held herself still, though every instinct told her to hide her hand. Thorn breathed in, once, then gave a soft sound that seemed nothing like the growl he had given Octavia. It was recognition. It was trust. It was ruin. Bracken turned in a slow circle and lay down across the front of Viola's skirts. Thorn folded himself beside her shoes, resting his scarred foreleg on the stone. The courtyard went utterly quiet. Not polite quiet. Not the silence of people pretending not to notice. This was the stunned absence of sound that comes when every prepared story fails at once. Viola stared down at the two great hounds lying at her feet. She did not touch them. She did not dare. Her face burned, but her hands were cold. Octavia's shawl slid from her arm and fell in a pale heap beside Bracken's flank. No one moved to pick it up. The Dowager Duchess was the first to speak. Her voice had lost its courtesy. "Miss Fairbourne." Viola lifted her head. "Your Grace. What have you done to them?" The question struck harder because it was not loud. It carried across the courtyard with all the force of rank. There it was. The answer society always reached when a low woman stood where she had not been invited to stand. Not why did they trust you? Not what kindness have they remembered? What have you done? Viola felt the Duke's gaze before she met it. He stood halfway down the steps, still as judgment, but his expression was not the Dowager's. It was not Octavia's. There was suspicion in it, yes, but also attention. Real attention. The dangerous kind. "Nothing, Your Grace," Viola said. Her voice was quieter than she wished, but it did not break. "I have done nothing." Octavia's laugh came softly from behind her. "How very modest. It seems my cousin has acquired admirers in unexpected places." Thorn's head lifted at the sound of Octavia's voice. A faint tremor ran along his body. Viola saw it. The Duke saw Viola see it. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtyard. Something passed between them that was not trust, not yet. It was the beginning of a question neither could safely ask in public. The Dowager drew herself to full height. "Peter, remove the dogs from Miss Fairbourne at once." Peter looked at the Duke. Everyone did. Alaric Streetmore did not look away from Viola. "No," he said. "Leave them." The Dowager inhaled. "Alaric, this is absurd." "Perhaps." His voice remained even. But absurdity often reveals more than arrangement. Octavia's fingers closed around the air where her shawl should have been. "Your Grace, I hope you don't imagine Miss Fairbourne has some special claim here. Viola is fond of making herself useful. Sometimes too useful." Viola turned toward her then. "Only slightly. Lady Octavia, I have never claimed anything belonging to you." The words were plain. They were not sharp enough to be called an insult. Still, Octavia's eyes changed. The Duke noticed that too. The Dowager's mouth tightened. "Miss Fairbourne, you forget yourself." Viola looked back at the older woman. Her knees felt unsteady, but she did not bend them. "I am trying very hard not to, Your Grace." The silence after that was small, but it mattered. It was the first silence Viola had ever made herself. Bracken laid his head across her shoe as if the matter had been decided. From the stair, the Duke watched the woman his mother had not chosen stand with two hounds at her feet and every eye in Halewick Park upon her. He had entered the courtyard prepared to correct an animal. Instead, he found himself studying a lady who looked as though being seen might cost her everything, yet who stood straighter beneath the cost. Then Thorn, still beside Viola's hem, gave one low breath and pressed his nose again toward her hidden glove. The Duke's gaze dropped to her reticule. Viola closed her fingers around it too late. His eyes returned to her face. "Miss Fairbourne," he said, and the way he spoke her name made the courtyard listen harder, "I believe we have something to understand." For several seconds after the Duke spoke, no one in the courtyard seemed certain whether the afternoon had become a scandal or merely the beginning of one. Viola stood with Bracken across the hem of her gown and Thorn pressed close to her right shoe, while every gaze that had passed over her an hour earlier now fastened to her as if she had stepped from behind a curtain with stolen jewels in both hands. The weight of it was worse than mockery. Mockery had edges. This was examination. The Dowager Duchess descended one step, then stopped, as though coming too near Viola might lend the scene an intimacy she did not intend to grant. "There is nothing to understand," she said. "The animals have been unsettled by the crowd. Miss Fairbourne happens to be standing where they chose to rest." The Duke did not answer his mother at once. He looked down at Thorn, whose scarred foreleg lay stretched over the pale stone, then at Viola's reticule, where her fingers had tightened around the hidden glove. "Happenstance is seldom so obedient," he said. Lady Octavia gave a small laugh. "Your Grace, I beg you not to make a mystery where there is only awkwardness. Viola has always had a way with helpless creatures. Stray kittens, kitchen birds, old servants with stories no one else wants to hear. It is quite touching, in its place." In its place. Viola felt the words land with practiced softness. They sounded almost kind to anyone who had not been reduced by them before. Bracken lifted his head and looked toward Octavia, not growling now, but watching. Octavia took half a step back before she remembered herself. The Duke saw that too. "Miss Fairbourne," he said, "have you been near my kennels before today?" There were several truthful answers. Yes, from a distance. Yes, against every rule of propriety. Yes, because Thorn had been caught in an iron snare near the woodland path and no one else had heard him. Yes, because she had knelt in the mud with her heart beating so hard she thought it would frighten him further. Yes, because the world was full of creatures who suffered quietly when no one important was listening. She gave the only answer that would not destroy her. "I have walked on the south lawn, Your Grace, as any guest might." "That was not my question." No, her voice remained steady through force alone. "It was not." A soft stir moved through the ladies under the portico. The rector's wife looked at her with alarm and pity. Viola disliked the pity more. Pity was often the first stitch in a shroud. The Dowager Duchess's eye sharpened. "Miss Fairbourne, you will answer his Grace directly." Viola dipped her head. "I have no wish to be evasive, Your Grace." "Then don't be," Octavia murmured. Viola turned her face toward her cousin. "I am trying not to injure anyone with an incomplete truth." Octavia's smile froze. That sentence had not been planned. Viola knew it the instant it left her mouth. Poor relations survived by swallowing sentences like that. They did not set them down in the middle of a duke's courtyard where everyone could see the shape. The duke's expression changed by almost nothing, yet Viola sensed his attention deepen. "An incomplete truth," he repeated. "That is an unusual phrase." "It is often a useful one," Viola said, then wished she had not. The Dowager's voice cut in. "Enough. Peter, remove the hounds. Mrs. Vale, please see that Miss Fairbourne is taken inside and given a quiet place to recover from this display." A quiet place. Viola understood at once what that meant. Not the drawing room. Not the guest parlor. Somewhere out of sight, where a maid could be sent to watch her and a carriage could later be arranged without discussion. Thorn must have felt the change in her body because he lifted his head and pressed his muzzle lightly against her wrist. The torn glove inside the reticule seemed to burn. She did not move. Peter did not move either. His eyes flickered between the Dowager and the Duke, caught between rank and command. The Duke came down the remaining steps. He did not hurry. That made the movement more powerful. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "Miss Fairbourne is a guest at Halewick Park." The housekeeper curtsied at once. "Yes, Your Grace." "She will not be removed like a parcel that has been placed in the wrong room." Viola's breath caught before she could hide it. Octavia's gaze darted to the Dowager. The older woman's face had gone very still. "Alaric," she said, low enough that it might have been private if the courtyard had not been listening with all its skin, "you are allowing an embarrassment to become an insult." "To whom?" he asked. "To Lady Octavia, certainly." "To me." "To the purpose of this visit." "The purpose of this visit was to introduce Lady Octavia to my household." His eyes lowered briefly to Bracken and Thorn. "My household has responded." A tiny gasp escaped one of the county girls. Lady Octavia's cheeks flushed, and for the first time her beauty sharpened into something less graceful. I don't think I deserve to be mocked by dogs and defended by implications, Your Grace. Nor do I believe Miss Fairbourne deserves accusation without evidence. No one accused her, the dowager said. The Duke looked at his mother. You asked what she had done to them. Silence. This time it belonged to him. Viola felt the strange shelter of it, though she did not mistake shelter for safety. A duke's protection could alter the air, but it could not erase the fact that everyone had seen the hounds choose her over a lady with a title and a dowry. That sight would travel faster than truth. By nightfall, some version of it would be at every dinner table within 5 miles. By next week, London might hear that a poor cousin had bewitched the Duke's dogs. Or worse, his attention. Octavia bent and retrieved her shawl from the stones with 2 fingers, careful not to touch Bracken. Perhaps Viola should explain why they know her scent. The words were quiet, but the wound in them was deliberate. Viola met her cousin's eyes. She saw warning there. Not fear. Warning. Do not speak of the woods. Do not speak of the snare. Do not force me to remember what you saw. For one cold instant, Viola was no longer in the courtyard. She was beneath the thin grey evening of 3 weeks past, hearing a stifled animal sound beyond the shrubbery while Octavia complained that the path was damp and ordered the groom to bring the carriage round. She remembered falling behind. She remembered Thorn's leg caught and trembling. She remembered a strip of pale ribbon snagged near the iron teeth, a ribbon she had tucked away without understanding why. Then Octavia had called from the path, sharp with impatience, and Viola had torn her glove freeing the latch before anyone returned. She had never told anyone. Not even the aunt who might have believed her? I cannot explain an animal's choice, Viola said. Octavia's mouth curved. Convenient. No, Viola replied. Humiliating. That quiet answer did what protest would not have done. It made several faces shift. Even the rector's wife looked away, as if suddenly ashamed of her own curiosity. The Duke's gaze did not leave Viola. You consider this humiliating? He asked. To be stared at for something I cannot safely explain? Yes, Your Grace. Safely, he repeated. Another unusual word. The dowager stepped forward. My son is fond of precision, Miss Fairbourne. I advise you not to encourage it unless you are prepared to satisfy it. Viola looked at the older woman and felt the old training rise in her. Apologize. Lower your eyes. Make the powerful comfortable. She could do it. She had done it 1,000 times. Bracken's head still rested against her shoe. Thorn's dark eyes watched her as if the whole animal world had become a witness. Viola lowered her eyes, but not in surrender. I cannot satisfy what I do not understand, Your Grace. The Duke turned to Peter. Take Bracken and Thorn to the shaded side of the court. Do not force them near Lady Octavia. Yes, Your Grace. Peter stepped forward carefully. Thorn resisted for a moment, not with disobedience but reluctance. Viola dared to move her hand. She did not touch his head. She only opened her finger slightly near his ear, a small farewell no one but the dog and the Duke should have noticed. Thorn rose. Bracken followed. As the hounds moved away, the courtyard seemed to breathe again, but it was not the same courtyard. Something had been exposed, though no one yet knew its name. The dowager looked toward the house. Lady Octavia, we shall take tea inside. This unfortunate disturbance need not ruin the afternoon. Of course, Your Grace, Octavia said, recovering her Polish. I would not dream of allowing it. Then she leaned close enough to Viola that only she could hear. You should have stayed behind me. Viola did not answer. The Duke did. Miss Fairbourne will walk beside the party. Octavia looked up sharply. Your Grace? The path is wide enough. It was a simple sentence. It rearranged everything. Viola felt every eye upon her as the group began to move toward the entrance. The dowager went first with Octavia, though the stiffness of her shoulders betrayed the violence of her composure. The guests followed in murmuring clusters. Viola remained where she was for one breath too long, unable to persuade her feet that they were allowed to cross the same stones as those who had just judged her. The Duke paused beside her. He did not offer his arm. That would have been too public, too intimate, and too dangerous. Instead, he bent and picked up the silver-edged calling card case she had dropped without noticing. "Miss Fairbourne," he said quietly, placing it in her hand, "when someone cannot safely explain a thing, I generally ask who has made safety necessary." Viola looked up at him. His face was controlled, his voice low, his manner perfectly proper. Yet the question struck nearer than any accusation. "That is a dangerous habit, Your Grace." "Yes," he said. "I find it useful." For the first time that afternoon, Viola almost smiled. Almost. Then Thorn gave one soft sound from the shaded side of the court, and the moment vanished. The Duke's eyes dropped again to her reticule, to the place where the torn glove lay hidden. Viola closed her hand over it. He did not challenge her. "Not yet." "Come," he said, his voice carrying just enough for the others to hear. "You are not to be left behind." And as Viola followed him toward the house, she understood with a quiet fear that being left behind had been safer than being noticed by the Duke of Wycliffe. Tea was served beneath a ceiling painted with pale clouds, but no one in the drawing room looked upward. All attention had lowered itself to safer objects. A porcelain cup. A folded napkin. The silver tongs beside the sugar bowl. Anything but Miss Viola Fairbourne, who had entered beside the party instead of behind it and now sat in a chair too fine for the role everyone had assigned her. The Duke of Wycliffe had not placed her near him. That would have been too unmistakable. He had done something worse, at least in the Dowager Duchess's estimation. He had placed her where she could not be dismissed without effort. A small chair near the window, within sight of every guest, not near enough to claim importance, not far enough to disappear. Viola sat with Octavia's calling card case in her lap and her torn riding glove still hidden in the reticule at her wrist. She kept her hand still. She had learned early that nervous fingers invited questions. Lady Octavia accepted tea from the Dowager with a smile delicate enough to suggest injury bravely endured. "Your Grace is too kind. I assure you, I've quite recovered." "There was nothing from which you should have been required to recover," the Dowager said. Her voice was gentle in the way a blade might be polished. "My son's attachment to his animals occasionally makes him forget the comfort of his guests." The Duke stood near the mantel, one hand resting lightly on the carved edge. "My guests are most comfortable when no one lies to them." A spoon touched porcelain too sharply. The rector's wife lowered her eyes. Octavia's smile remained fixed, though Viola saw the pulse move once at her throat. The Dowager turned her face toward her son. "Alaric, there is no need to convert a rustic inconvenience into a moral inquiry." "Is that what it was?" he asked. "A rustic inconvenience. Hounds do not arrange marriages." The room stilled. The sentence had been meant to end the subject. Instead, it placed the true subject in the center of the carpet where everyone could see it. Marriage. Arrangement. Lady Octavia. How Streetmore. Viola looked down at the calling card case and wished its polished silver did not reflect her face in pieces. The Dowager took a slow breath. "Lady Octavia's father and I have corresponded with perfect understanding. Her dowry is substantial. Her lineage is unblemished. Her manners, as you have seen, are suited to a great house. She brings connection to the Earl of Merrow and stability to an estate that has endured enough uncertainty." "Halewick is not uncertain," the Duke said. "No estate governed by a young unmarried man is entirely secure in the public imagination. Then the public imagination must learn discipline." A faint color touched the Dowager's cheek. "You mistake independence for strength. A dukedom is not a private mood, Alaric. It is a duty. It requires continuity, alliance, and a duchess whose place cannot be questioned." Viola felt the last words without looking up. A duchess whose place could not be questioned. Not a poor relation with a scarred glove and a borrowed seat near the window. Not a woman whose presence made hounds kneel and ladies whisper. Octavia set down her cup. "Your Grace, I hope His Grace does not feel pressed on my account. I would never wish to enter a house where I was unwelcome." It was beautifully humble. It was also a trap. The Dowager leaned toward her at once. "My dear child, you are entirely welcome." The Duke's expression did not alter. Welcome is not the question. Octavia's lashes lowered. Then perhaps I don't understand the question. Nor do I, the dowager said. Which is why this conversation should not continue before guests. Her gaze moved at last to Viola, and the word guests became accusation. Viola rose at once, because that was safer than being told to rise. Your Grace, I would be glad to withdraw if my presence is inconvenient. The Duke looked at her. Sit down, Miss Fairbourne. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Viola remained standing for one heartbeat. In that heartbeat, she understood the danger of obedience from two directions. If she obeyed the dowager, she disappeared. If she obeyed the Duke, she became a point of conflict between mother and son. Octavia watched with mild interest, as if Viola were an insect deciding where to land. Viola Saturday. The dowager's mouth tightened. You are generous with your protection today, Alaric. I am precise with it. Toward a lady who has offered no explanation for a very odd familiarity with your hounds. Octavia sighed softly. Please, Your Grace, don't trouble His Grace further. Viola means no harm. She often confuses kindness with entitlement. It is a fault of circumstance, not malice. Viola looked up then. The room was bright, the tea fragrant, the chairs elegant, and every word had been arranged to make her small. She felt the old instruction rise again. Apologize. Make it easier. Survive the afternoon. But she saw Peter's flushed face in the courtyard. She saw Thorn's lowered head. She heard the word entitlement where kindness should have been. Lady Octavia, she said, I am sorry if I embarrassed you. Octavia's expression softened with victory. Then Viola continued. But I cannot apologize for the hound's conduct, because I did not command it. I cannot apologize for standing where I was told to stand. And I cannot apologize for being noticed when I had made every effort not to be. The silence after her words was absolute. It did not last long, but it was enough. The Duke's gaze settled on her with an intensity that made her wish she had spoken less and, strangely, glad she had not. The dowager set her cup down. Miss Fairbourne, that is an impertinent speech. Yes, Your Grace, Viola said quietly. It may be. But it is also a truthful one. Octavia's eyes hardened. Truthful? You speak of truth while refusing to answer how those animals know you. I refuse to invent an answer for the comfort of people who have already chosen one. The words were calm. Viola hardly recognized herself in them. She did not sound brave. She sounded tired, which was sometimes the root from which bravery grew when all prettier virtues had been exhausted. The Duke moved from the mantel. Enough. Octavia turned to him at once. Your Grace, I didn't mean to distress her. Viola is sensitive when she feels corrected. I was not speaking to Miss Fairbourne. The room shifted again. The dowager rose. Alaric, I must insist upon a private word. You shall have one. He looked toward Mrs. Vale, who stood near the door with the stillness of a woman trained to hear everything and reveal nothing. Mrs. Vale, Miss Fairbourne will be given the blue chamber in the east wing. The dowager stared at him. The blue chamber is a guest room. Yes. Surely a smaller room near Lady Octavia's maid would be more suitable. Miss Fairbourne is not Lady Octavia's maid. Viola felt the statement pass through the room like a hand lifting a weight from her shoulders. Not all of it. Enough to let her breathe. Mrs. Vale curtsied. Yes, Your Grace. I shall see it prepared. Octavia's face had gone carefully blank. How thoughtful. Viola will be quite overwhelmed by such honor. Viola met her cousin's eyes. I shall try to survive clean sheets. The rector's wife made a small sound that might have been a cough. The Duke's mouth did not smile, but something in his eyes changed, a brief glimmer gone before anyone could call it warmth. The dowager did not miss it. Her gaze moved from her son to Viola with new calculation. Miss Fairbourne, she said, Lady Octavia has shown you patience. I trust you will not mistake His Grace's courtesy for a change in your situation. Viola stood, because Mrs. Vale had approached and because remaining seated would look like defiance rather than dignity. I know my situation very well, Your Grace. Do you? Yes. Viola's fingers closed around the reticule. That has always been the trouble. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the Duke inclined his head. Mrs. Vale. The housekeeper opened the door. Viola followed, feeling Octavia's anger at her back like heat from a closed stove. She expected to be led upstairs at once, but in the corridor the Duke's voice stopped her. Miss Fairbourne. Mrs. Vale paused at a respectful distance. Viola turned. The Duke stood in the doorway of the drawing room, with the sound of strained conversation resuming behind him. Your Grace. When a person says she knows her situation, I have found it useful to ask who taught it to her. Viola's hand tightened on the reticule again. Many people, Your Grace. Most did not know they were teaching. His eyes dropped to her wrist. And the Hounds? I do not know what they know. That is not the same as saying they know nothing. No, she held his gaze for one dangerous second. It is not. Mrs. Vale looked discreetly toward the stairs, pretending not to hear. From somewhere beyond the house, distant but clear, one of the hounds gave a low, restless bark. The Duke's expression sharpened, and Viola saw the question return to him. Not accusation. Not yet. But pursuit. Rest while you can, Miss Fairbourne, he said. Halewick has grown curious. Viola curtsied. Then Halewick and I are equally unfortunate. This time, the change in his face was almost a smile. Almost. She turned before she could see it fully and followed Mrs. Vale toward the east wing. Behind her, the Duke went back into the drawing room to face his mother, his chosen bride, and a plan that had begun to crack the moment two hounds refused to pretend. By the time Mrs. Vale left her in the blue chamber, Viola understood that comfort could feel like a reprimand. The room was not grand enough for a duchess, but it was far beyond anything ever assigned to her in the Merrow household. A clean fire burned beneath a white mantle. The counterpane was smooth, the washstand held fresh water, and the window overlooked the eastern lawn, where a narrow path curved toward the kennels before disappearing behind a screen of yew. Someone had placed a small vase of primroses on the table. That kindness, because it had not asked permission from anyone important, nearly undid her. Viola stood in the center of the room with her reticule still looped around her wrist and told herself not to cry. Tears would only confuse the matter. She was not injured. She had not been dismissed. She had, by every outward measure, been elevated. A guest chamber. A fire. A housekeeper's curtsy. His Grace's public correction. Yet each courtesy felt like a candle set beside dry paper. Light enough to warm. Light enough to burn. She crossed to the window and looked toward the kennels. She could not see Bracken or Thorn, but she imagined them in the shaded yard, one restless, one watching, both carrying the memory she had tried to bury beneath silence and a torn glove. Slowly, she opened the reticule. The glove lay folded beneath her handkerchief. It had once been brown kid leather, plain but serviceable, one of the few things she owned that had fitted properly. Now the seam along the palm was split, and the right wrist bore a dark mark where mud and blood had dried together before she could wash it clean. She touched the torn place and saw again the iron teeth of the snare, half hidden under wet leaves, Thorn's trembling body, the pale ribbon caught where no ribbon should have been. Foolish, she whispered. You should have thrown it away. Talking to gloves now? Octavia's voice came from the doorway. Viola closed her fingers over the glove and turned. Lady Octavia entered without waiting to be invited, her pearl skirts whispering over the carpet. She had removed her bonnet, but the matching ribbon still trailed from one hand, smooth and glossy. Her expression was not angry now. Anger had too much honesty. She looked amused, which was worse. The blue chamber, Octavia said, glancing around. How very touching. If His Grace continues at this pace, perhaps he will give you the silver at dinner and ask me to fetch your shawl. I did not ask to be placed here. You rarely ask, Viola. That is one of your cleverer habits. You simply stand near enough to be pitied and far enough to seem innocent. Viola slipped the torn glove back into the reticule, but Octavia's eyes followed the motion. What are you hiding? A glove in poor repair. Then show it. No, the word surprised them both. Octavia's face cooled. No. Viola held the reticule with both hands. It is mine. Nearly everything you have is mine by courtesy. Not that. A little silence opened between them, private and sharp. Octavia crossed to the window and looked out toward the kennels. You should be careful. The Duke enjoys puzzles, but men like him tire of them once they discover the pieces are cheap. Then I shall endeavor not to be a puzzle. Too late. Octavia turned, smiling again. Do you know what will be said if this continues? That you contrived the whole thing. That you found a way to make those animals notice you. That you encouraged His Grace's attention because you could not bear to see me receive it. Viola's fingers tightened. I have never wanted what is yours. No. You only want people to believe you are too noble to want it. Viola looked at the woman she had followed through drawing rooms, carriage yards, dress fittings, and breakfast tables. There had been a time when she had tried to love Octavia. They were cousins, after all. Childhood had placed them in the same nursery for 3 summers before money, beauty, and expectation taught them their separate stations. Viola had mended Octavia's torn hems, covered for her sharp remarks, read aloud when Octavia had headaches, and listened when Octavia complained that perfection was a cage. Perhaps it was. But Octavia had never forgiven Viola for discovering that cages could be gilded from the inside. Why did Thorn fear your hand? Viola asked. Octavia's smile vanished. Only for a breath. Then it returned, thinner. What a strange question. Not to him. Do not become poetic. It doesn't suit your gown. 3 weeks ago, near the south path, you called for the carriage because the grass was damp. I fell behind. You are always falling behind. I heard something in the wood. Octavia's gaze hardened. Be careful. The warning should have silenced her. Instead, it steadied her. Was the ribbon yours? Octavia walked toward her so quickly that Viola's back nearly touched the bedpost before she forced herself still. No blow came. Octavia was too disciplined for anything that would leave a witness. She only leaned close enough for her perfume to fill the air. You saw nothing that concerns you. You heard nothing that concerns you. You are here because I allowed it, and you will leave when I decide you have become inconvenient. Do you understand? Viola felt the old fear. It came like cold water around the ankles. But beneath it was something new, something the hounds had awakened when they chose her before witnesses. No, she said quietly. I understand less than I did this morning. Octavia stared at her. Then she laughed once, softly. Then learn quickly. She moved to the door. Dinner is at 8. Try not to look rescued. It invites questions. When she was gone, Viola remained still until the sound of her cousin's steps faded down the corridor. Only then did she breathe. Her hand shook when she took out the glove again, and this time she saw what she had missed before. A single thread, pale and lustrous, was caught in the torn seam near the wrist. It was not from the glove. It was not from her gown. Viola touched it with the tip of one finger. Pearl-colored silk. Outside, beyond the window, a hound barked once. Not distressed. Calling. Less than half an hour later, the Duke of Wycliffe stood in the stable yard with Peter and a stooped kennel master named Mr. Hobb, studying the latch on the small gate behind the kennels. The afternoon had shifted toward evening. Shadows lengthened across the packed earth. Horses stamped in their stalls. Somewhere nearby, Bracken gave a low huff, impatient with human delay. Alaric did not like delay either. It had the odor of excuse. Here, Your Grace, Peter said, pointing with a hesitant finger. I didn't think much of it before. The latch bore a faint stain along one side, dark in the groove where rain had not reached. Beside it, a few fibers clung to a splinter in the wood. Brown leather, perhaps. A fine thread too pale to belong to stable cloth. Alaric crouched and examined the mark without touching it. When? Mr. Hobb scratched his jaw. Could be weeks. Could be less. That gate sticks if pulled wrong. A lady's glove would tear easy there. Peter swallowed. It was 3 weeks ago, Your Grace. Alaric looked at him. The boy's face reddened. You have remembered something. I didn't know if I should say. That is rarely a sign that silence is harmless. Peter stared at his boots. I saw a lady near the lower kennels at dusk. Not clear, sir. She had mud on her hem and something wrapped around her hand. Thorn was with her. He was limping, but quiet. Quieter than he'd be for most. Which lady? Peter's throat moved. I thought it might be Miss Fairbourne. Alaric rose slowly. You thought? Yes, Your Grace. Why did you not report it? Because she looked frightened, sir. Not of Thorn. Of being found there. Mr. Hobb made a low sound. That snare we found after. I told the undergroom it was poachers near the boundary. Alaric turned to him. You found a snare. Broken open, Your Grace. Not set proper by the time we saw it. Like someone had forced it loose. I should have told you direct. Yes, Alaric said. You should have. The old man bowed his head. Beg pardon. Alaric looked toward the house. The east wing windows caught the last light, and for a moment he imagined Miss Fairbourne standing behind one of them, holding secrets as if they were safer than truth. Bracken came to his side and pressed a heavy shoulder against his leg. Thorn remained near the kennel door, eyes fixed on the path to the house. Peter, Alaric said, did Lady Octavia ever come this way before today? The boy went still. There it was again. Fear wearing the mask of obedience. Answer me. I saw her once near the stable wall, Peter said, barely above a whisper. That same week. She was angry about mud on her skirt. Thorn came too close. She raised her hand, and he backed away hard. I didn't see more than that. I swear I didn't. Alaric's face did not change, but the air around him seemed to cool. You will not be punished for telling me what you saw. Peter looked up, startled. No, Your Grace? No. But you will tell me everything you remember when I ask. Yes, Your Grace. Alaric dismissed them and remained by the gate after they withdrew. He reached down and touched the splintered latch with 2 fingers. A torn glove. A frightened hound. A lady who lied not to gain attention, but to avoid it. A bride his mother considered beyond reproach. The pieces did not yet form a picture, but they had begun to resist the one presented to him. When he returned to the house, he found Miss Fairbourne in the corridor outside the blue chamber, carrying a folded shawl she clearly meant to return to Lady Octavia. She stopped when she saw him. Her right hand moved at once toward the reticule. Your Grace. Miss Fairbourne. He looked at the shawl. Still making yourself useful. A faint color touched her face. Old habits are economical. One does not discard them until one can afford better. And can you? Not yet. The honesty surprised him. Most people embroidered need until it resembled choice. She did not. I have been to the kennels, he said. Her face became still. I hope Thorn is well. You know which one is Thorn. Everyone has been told their names. Not everyone looks toward his left foreleg before asking after him. She said nothing. He took one step closer, careful to leave a proper distance between them in the corridor. Were you injured, Miss Fairbourne? That undid her more than accusation would have. He saw it in the small falter of her breath. No, Your Grace. That is not the same as saying you were not hurt. Her eyes lifted to his. You are fond of precision. Yes. It must make the world very troublesome. Only when people insist upon lying badly. For the first time, something like humor moved through her fear. Then I shall endeavor to lie better. I would prefer you did not lie at all. That is a luxury generally reserved for people who are believed. The word struck him with quiet force. Before he could answer, footsteps sounded at the far end of the corridor. Viola stepped back at once. The space between them became proper again, and somehow less honest. Lady Octavia appeared near the stair, smiling as if she had not expected to find them and pleased to discover she had. Viola, she called. There you are. I was beginning to wonder if the blue chamber had swallowed you whole. Viola curtsied slightly. I was bringing your shawl. Octavia's gaze moved from Viola to the Duke, then to the reticule. How thoughtful. You do remember your place when reminded. Alaric saw Viola absorb the insult without lowering her head. He saw, too, how her hand tightened around the torn secret at her wrist. The evening had not yet reached dinner, and already Halewick Park had divided itself into those who wished the truth quiet and those who had begun to hear it breathing behind the walls. Octavia took the shawl. Come, Viola. We must dress. One should look one's best in a house where even the dogs are critics. Thorn barked from outside, a single clear sound that carried through the corridor. Viola looked toward the window. So did the Duke. Octavia did not. And in that small refusal to look, Alaric Streetmore found another piece of the truth. Dinner at Halewick Park began with a seating card that tried to put Viola Fairbourne back where the afternoon had found her. Her name, written in a neat secretary's hand, rested near the lower end of the long table between the rector's wife and an elderly cousin of the Dowager Duchess who had already mistaken her twice for Lady Octavia's paid companion. Viola saw it, accepted it, and might have been grateful for the obscurity if Octavia had not paused behind her shoulder and said softly, "There. A sensible place at last." Viola did not turn. "I have always thought sense underrated." "That is because you own so little else." The words were covered by the rustle of silk and the movement of footmen arranging chairs. No one heard them except Viola, and perhaps that was the craft of it. Cruelty was safest when spoken below the level at which society was required to object. The dining room glittered with disciplined magnificence. Candlelight struck the silver, the crystal, the polished mahogany, and the painted faces of Wycliffe ancestors staring down from the walls with the rigid disappointment common to old portraits. The Dowager Duchess presided near one end with Lady Octavia placed where all could admire her profile. The Earl of Merrow's solicitor, Mr. Calder, sat not far away, a dry, careful man whose presence turned marriage into arithmetic without requiring anyone to mention sums. Local gentry filled the remaining chairs. Every guest had brought curiosity to the table and dressed it as manners. Viola took her assigned seat and laid her reticule beside her plate. The torn glove inside seemed safer there than upstairs, which made no sense and felt true all the same. She had barely settled when the Duke entered. No one announced him loudly, yet conversation thinned at once. Alaric Streetmore walked the length of the table with the calm of a man who had never needed to hurry toward authority because authority waited for him. He looked first at his mother's arrangement. Then he looked at Viola's place. Something in his face cooled. "Mrs. Vale," he said to the housekeeper waiting by the sideboard, "there appears to be an error." The dowager's hand paused above her wineglass. "An error? Miss Fairbourne is too far from the subject on which I require her opinion." Viola's stomach tightened. The room did not move, but attention sharpened. The dowager smiled with effort. And what subject could require Miss Fairbourne's opinion at dinner? The south path. Octavia's knife touched her plate with a small, bright sound. The Duke continued, "She has walked it. Several guests have asked about the grounds. It is inefficient to call questions down the table." Inefficient. The word was so dry, so perfectly practical, that no one could accuse him of gallantry. A footman moved at once under Mrs. Vale's direction. Viola's card was lifted, her chair reassigned, and within moments she found herself placed 3 seats from the Duke, across from Mr. Calder and within clear view of the dowager. It was not a triumph. It was exposure dressed as courtesy. Viola sat because refusing would create a greater scene than obeying. Octavia watched her over the rim of her glass. "How fortunate," she said, sweetly enough for the table. "Viola does enjoy being useful." The Duke unfolded his napkin. Usefulness is a rare quality. It should not be wasted at the foot of a table. Mr. Calder glanced up. The rector's wife studied her soup. The dowager's face held its composure by force. Viola felt heat rise along her throat, but she kept her voice level. "Your Grace flatters my knowledge of paths. I know only how easily one may lose one's way on them." "That is often the most important knowledge," he said. The first course arrived, and with it came the false mercy of movement. Footmen served white soup. Candles trembled when a door opened. Silver passed from hand to hand. For 10 minutes, the table spoke of weather, roads, parish repairs, and a musicale planned in Winchester. Viola answered only when addressed. She did not look toward the window, though she could hear a faint sound from outside once, perhaps a hound shifting in the yard, perhaps imagination taking the shape of guilt. Then Mr. Calder turned to Octavia. "Lady Octavia, I trust Hampshire has not disappointed you after London." "Not at all," Octavia said. "A great estate has charms one cannot find in town. Provided, of course, it is governed with care." "You have always admired order," the dowager said. "Order is the soul of a household." Octavia's gaze moved, gentle and exact, to Viola. "And kindness must be ordered too, mustn't it? Unordered kindness becomes presumption. One begins by feeding a stray cat, then advising a housekeeper, then wandering into places where one has no proper business." A small smile traveled along the table, uncertain whether it was permitted to become amusement. Viola set down her spoon. The Duke's eyes did not move from Octavia, but his voice came quietly. "That is a severe progression from cats." Octavia laughed. "I speak in general, Your Grace. We have all known people who confuse softness of heart with freedom from rules." "Have we?" he asked. "I fear so." Her expression turned tender. "Viola has the best intentions, but she sometimes forgets that a house is not improved by every hand that wishes to touch it." There it was. Not accusation. Preparation. Viola could feel the table being taught how to understand her. Poor. Overfamiliar. Sentimental. Inclined to step where she was not invited. The old panic stirred, and with it the old skill of retreat. She could smile. She could lower her eyes. She could allow Octavia to define her because definitions, once accepted, at least ended the immediate pain. The Duke looked at her then. Not rescuing. Waiting. That was more difficult. Rescue allowed a woman to remain silent and grateful. Waiting required her to possess a voice. Viola lifted her glass and took a sip of water. "I have found," she said, "that rules are most respected by those who are punished for breaking them." Mr. Calder's brows rose. The dowager's gaze sharpened. Octavia's smile held. "How solemn, Viola. I hope no one is punishing you." "No one at this table, Lady Octavia." "Then perhaps you speak too gravely for the occasion." "Perhaps. I have little talent for lightness when a serious thing is hidden beneath it." The table went quiet enough for the candles to seem loud. Octavia's fingers tightened around her fork, then relaxed. What a dramatic turn of phrase. His Grace has made a philosopher of you in a single afternoon. Viola looked down at her plate, then back up. No. Circumstance did that. His Grace merely asked a question before deciding the answer. It was not a declaration. It was not even a defense. It was a line placed carefully on the floor. The Duke's expression remained controlled, but Viola saw the faint shift in his eyes. Approval, perhaps. Or warning. The dowager intervened before the silence could deepen. "Mr. Calder, you were telling me of Lord Merrow's plans for the northern property." Mr. Calder accepted the rescue and spoke of leases, tenants, and improvements with the dull confidence of a man who believed land more trustworthy than people. Conversation resumed, though it no longer flowed. It moved around Viola as water moves around a stone. During the fish course, the Duke asked her whether the south path was shaded in the late afternoon. "Yes, Your Grace." "Enough to obscure a person from the house." "From the upper windows, perhaps." "Not from the stable wall." Octavia's head turned. Viola realized at once that she had said too much. The Duke realized it too. "You know the stable wall has a view of the path?" he asked. "I noticed it today." "Today?" "Yes." "A lie?" "Not a good one." His mouth did not soften, but his voice lowered. "You should take care, Miss Fairbourne. Bad lies invite worse questions." "Then I shall hope no one asks them at dinner. I generally prefer dessert for worse questions." Against every sensible instinct, Viola nearly laughed. It escaped only as a breath, but the Duke heard it. For a moment, the table receded. He was no longer only a title across polished mahogany. He was a man who had chosen not to expose her lie when exposing it would have been easy. That restraint unsettled her more than accusation. Octavia saw the exchange. Her gaze moved from Viola's face to the Duke's, then dropped to the reticule by Viola's chair. "Viola," she said, "clear enough for everyone, you are still carrying that little bag. How devoted you are to it. One would think it held treasure." Viola's hand went still near the stem of her glass. "Only ordinary things. How disappointing." The Duke cut into the silence. Ordinary things often explain extraordinary behavior. Octavia tilted her head. "Is that another of your principles, Your Grace?" "One of my more reliable ones." "Then perhaps you will apply it to your hounds." "Their extraordinary behavior has caused Miss Fairbourne a great deal of attention. I cannot help wondering whether she minds that as much as she claims." Viola felt the insult arrive under a cover of concern. Before the Duke could answer, she did. "I mind being misunderstood. Attention is only unpleasant when it arrives with a verdict already attached." The rector's wife looked at Viola then with something closer to respect than pity. Mr. Calder looked mildly alarmed. The dowager's mouth became a thin line. Octavia's smile did not reach her eyes. "You speak very boldly for someone who dislikes attention. Boldness and dislike may share a room when forced." The Duke lifted his wineglass, though he did not drink. "A useful observation." The dowager set down her fork. "This conversation has become unnecessarily pointed." "I agree," the Duke said. "Let us make it plain. No guest in my house is to be treated as guilty without evidence." His gaze moved down the table, touching each face lightly, then resting on Octavia for one measured second. "Not by rank. Not by rumor. Not by implication." Viola looked at her hands in her lap because she did not trust her face. The protection was public enough to matter and restrained enough to remain defensible. It did not absolve her. It gave her room to breathe. Octavia lowered her eyes. "How noble. I hope Miss Fairbourne appreciates such care." "I appreciate fairness," Viola said. "Care is more than I would presume to claim." The Duke heard the distinction. It seemed to strike him, though he gave no sign anyone else could read. The meal continued after that, but the shape of the evening had changed. Viola was no longer invisible, and Octavia no longer looked certain that visibility belonged to her alone. Near the end of dinner, as servants cleared the final plates, a muffled scrape sounded beyond the terrace doors. A footman glanced toward the window. The Duke noticed. "What is it?" The footman hesitated. "One of the hounds, Your Grace." "Thorn, I think." "He won't settle." The dowager closed her eyes briefly, as if patience itself had become a burden. Must the animals govern the entire day? The Duke rose. "No. But when they refuse rest twice, I listen." Viola looked toward the dark glass of the terrace doors. A pale reflection stared back at her, composed and frightened. Octavia's voice came softly across the table. "Perhaps Thorn has found another secret." The Duke turned toward the door. "Perhaps," he said. Then his eyes met Viola's. "Or perhaps he remembers one." The footman opened the terrace door. Cool air entered, carrying the scent of damp earth and yew. From somewhere beyond the lawn, Thorn gave another low, urgent sound. Not a growl this time. A summons. And before anyone could stop him, the Duke stepped out into the darkness, leaving the table behind him and the question of Viola Fairbourne still burning in every candlelit face. By morning, the house had learned to speak softly around the kennels. The knowledge moved through Halewick Park before breakfast had finished cooling on its silver dishes, passed from underfootman to housemaid, from scullery to stable yard, from the back stairs to the breakfast room where guests pretended not to notice that the Duke had not come in from the grounds until long after midnight. Thorn had been found at dawn near the kennel gate, lying with his head between his paws and refusing food. He was not bleeding. He was not wild. He was worse than that. He was quiet in a way that made men who knew animals lower their voices. Viola heard of it not from the Dowager Duchess, nor from Lady Octavia, but from a chambermaid who entered the blue room with hot water and eyes too full of alarm to conceal. "Beg pardon, miss," the girl whispered before remembering to look frightened of her own boldness. "It is only that the dark hound, Thorn, is taken poorly." Viola's hand tightened around the edge of the washstand. "How poorly?" "He won't eat. Mr. Hobbs says there's something wrong, but not like a fever. His Grace has sent for the farrier from the village, though Mr. Hobbs says it isn't a horse matter, not properly." "Thank you." The girl bobbed and fled, leaving Viola with the steam rising between her and the window. Beyond the glass, the lawn looked clean and innocent under pale sunlight. Nothing about it suggested accusation. That was the danger of great houses. They could hold cruelty and polish in the same hand. Viola dressed quickly in her plain grey morning gown. The torn glove remained hidden in her reticule with the pearl-coloured thread caught at its seam. She told herself not to go near the kennels. A lady did not rush through a duke's house toward a hound she had no reason to love. A poor relation did not place her concern where it could be interpreted as guilt. She was fastening her cuffs when a firm knock sounded. Mrs. Vale entered, composed but grave. "Miss Fairbourne, Her Grace requests your presence in the lower hall." Not the breakfast room. Not the drawing room. The lower hall. Viola understood at once that this was not a request. "Am I to bring anything?" Mrs. Vale's eyes moved to the reticule, then away. "Only yourself, miss." The lower hall smelled of stone, beeswax, and the faint dampness brought in from the yard. By the time Viola reached it, half the household seemed to have found duties along its edges. Footmen stood near doors. A maid held folded linen she had clearly forgotten how to carry. Mr. Hobb, the kennel master, waited with his cap crushed in both hands. Peter stood beside him, white around the mouth. Near the center of the hall, the Dowager Duchess stood like a magistrate who needed no bench. Lady Octavia sat in a carved chair with a handkerchief pressed to her lips, beautiful in distress. The Duke stood apart from them all, his face unreadable. That, more than anything, made Viola afraid. At the base of the stair lay Thorn on a folded stable blanket. Bracken stood over him, still as a sentinel. Thorn lifted his head when Viola entered. Only a little. Only enough to look at her. The ache that moved through her nearly broke her caution. She stopped before anyone could accuse her of running to him. The Dowager saw the movement. Of course she did. "Miss Fairbourne," she said, "how interesting that he recognizes you even now." Viola curtsied. "Your Grace." Octavia lowered the handkerchief. Her eyes were bright, though whether from tears or triumph Viola could not tell. "I am so sorry, Viola. I told Her Grace I could not believe it of you. I truly did." The hall seemed to tilt. Viola looked from Octavia to the Dowager. "Believe what?" Mr. Hobb shifted, miserable. Peter looked at the floor. The Duke said nothing. The Dowager raised one hand. A maid stepped forward and placed a small brown glass bottle upon the table near the stairs. Viola knew it before anyone named it. Her stomach turned cold. "This was found in your work basket," the Dowager said. "Among your sewing things?" Viola stared at the bottle. Liniment for her wrist, purchased quietly in London by an old maidservant who disliked questions. She had used it last night after dinner when the ache returned. She had left it wrapped in linen beside her combs in the blue chamber. Not in her work basket. Not where a maid would find it during a search unless someone had wished it found. "That is mine," Viola said. A murmur moved through the hall. Octavia closed her eyes, as if pained by honesty. The Dowager's voice sharpened. "At least we are spared denial." "It is mine," Viola repeated. "But it was not in my work basket." "Where was it?" the Duke asked. His first words. They were quiet. Viola looked at him. "In my chamber. Wrapped in linen." "For what purpose?" "My wrist." The Dowager's gaze dropped toward Viola's gloved hand. "How convenient. The same wrist the animal favored yesterday." Octavia rose slowly, as if dignity required effort. "Viola, why did you not tell us you had medicine?" If Thorn licked it from your glove, or if you used it near him without understanding, I did not use it near him. You were near him, Octavia said gently. Everyone saw it. Because he came to me. Or because he had learned to. Viola felt the hall listening. There were accusations that announced themselves plainly, and there were accusations that approached dressed as concern. This one wore silk. Lady Octavia, Viola said, what are you suggesting? Octavia's eyes filled just enough to seem reluctant. I don't want to suggest anything. But you were seen near the kennels before. The hounds behaved strangely with you. Now Thorn is ill, and a bottle from your belongings is found where it should not be. I only wish to understand. So do I. The Duke's voice cut through the hall. He turned to Mr. Hobb. Has Thorn been poisoned? The kennel master swallowed. I cannot say poison, your grace. Not proper. He is unsettled, off his feed, breathing steady. No froth, no twisting pains. Could be he took something sour. Could be fright. Could be rough handling. Could be none of those, and I would be a fool to swear more than I know. The dowager's mouth tightened. You are not being asked to lecture, Hobb. No, your grace. He is being asked to tell the truth, the Duke said. Mr. Hobb bowed his head. Then truth is, I don't know that the bottle did it. Octavia's fingers tightened around her handkerchief. But it may have. Many things may have, the Duke said. He looked at Viola then, and there was the question she had dreaded. Not whether the bottle was hers. Not whether she had been near Thorn. Something far worse because it mattered. Did he believe her capable of cruelty? Viola felt every person in the hall waiting for her to plead. She would not. Pleading made a spectacle of weakness, and she had been made spectacle enough. Your Grace, she said, may I ask one question? The dowager's brows lifted. You are in no position to conduct inquiries. The Duke did not look away from Viola. Ask. Viola turned to Mr. Hobb. If Thorn had been made ill by something on my glove yesterday, would he have come to me afterward? Would Bracken have allowed it? Mr. Hobb's weathered face changed. It was not certainty. It was thought. Not likely, miss. A hound remembers what sickens him if the scent is strong. Thank you. Viola looked back at the Duke. That is all. Octavia gave a soft, wounded laugh. How clever. You make the animal your witness because he cannot contradict you. No, Viola said. I ask the man who knows him because I am being accused by people who do not. The word struck the hall. Peter looked up. Mrs. Vale's face remained composed, but something in her eyes moved. The dowager's expression hardened into open displeasure. Miss Fairbourne, you forget yourself repeatedly. Viola's heart beat fast, but her voice held. I am remembering myself under difficulty, Your Grace. The Duke stepped closer to the table and picked up the bottle. He uncorked it, smelled it, and recorked it without comment. This proves only that Miss Fairbourne owns liniment. And that she concealed it, the dowager said. Half the house conceals some ache or another, he replied. I do not call that evidence of malice. Octavia's face paled in a way that made her look, for a moment, less like a bride and more like a woman whose script had been disturbed. Your Grace, surely you cannot ignore the pattern. I am studying it. And what do you see? The question was too sharp. She softened it at once. Forgive me. I'm distressed. Thorn frightened me yesterday, but I would never wish him unwell. Thorn shifted on the blanket at the sound of her voice. It was small. A flinch, almost hidden by Bracken's body. Viola saw it. So did the Duke. His eyes moved from the hound to Octavia, then to Peter. The boy looked down so quickly that his fear became visible. The dowager noticed the Duke noticing and acted at once. This has gone far enough. Miss Fairbourne cannot remain at the center of this household while suspicion grows around her. She should return to her family before gossip becomes unmanageable. There it was. Not justice. Removal. Viola felt the cold sweep of it. To leave now would be to leave guilty. Every mile from Halewick Park would lengthen the story until she became the poor cousin who had bewitched hounds, poisoned trust, and tried to climb above her station. The Duke set the bottle down. No, the words stopped the hall. The Dowager turned slowly. No. Miss Fairbourne will not be dismissed while an inquiry is incomplete. You would keep her here under a cloud. Better a cloud than a verdict manufactured for convenience. A footman drew in a breath and tried to disguise it as a cough. Octavia stared at the Duke, her eyes bright with offence. And what of me, your Grace? Am I to remain under suspicion because your hounds prefer my cousin? Are you under suspicion? He asked. The question was mild. It landed like a stone. Octavia had no immediate answer. Viola looked at the Duke. He had not declared her innocent. That truth stung even while his protection steadied her. He had not rescued her from uncertainty. He had refused to let others bury her beneath it. It was not enough to heal. It was enough to keep her standing. Then his gaze returned to her, and the hall seemed to narrow until there were only his grey eyes and the question she could no longer bear unspoken. Viola lifted her chin. Do you believe I am capable of cruelty, your Grace? The silence that followed was unlike any that had come before. It was not society holding its breath for gossip. It was something more dangerous. It was a man being asked to place his judgment where his rank already stood. The Duke looked at Thorn, at the bottle, at the Dowager, at Octavia, and finally back at Viola. No, he said. Octavia's handkerchief crumpled in her fist. The Dowager went still. Viola's breath left her so quietly no one could have heard it. The Duke continued, but belief is not proof. And proof is what will end this. The relief inside her faltered. Not because he was wrong. Because he was right, and truth had never been kind enough to arrive merely because she needed it. Thorn gave a soft, tired sound from the blanket. Viola stepped forward despite herself, then stopped before touching him. May I? She asked. The question was for the Duke, but the answer came first from Thorn, who lifted his head toward her hand. Yes, the Duke said. Viola knelt beside the blanket, careful of her skirts and of every watching eye. She did not stroke Thorn like a pet before a crowd. She only laid her uninjured hand near his nose and let him choose. Thorn breathed against her fingers, then rested his head again. Bracken lowered himself beside them. No one spoke. That silence, more than any argument, troubled Lady Octavia's perfect face. At last the Duke turned to Peter. No one is to remove anything from Miss Fairbourne's chamber. No one is to touch the kennels without Mr. Hobb present. No one leaves Halewick Park until I understand what has happened. The Dowager's voice was low. Alaric, you cannot command guests as if they were tenants. In my house, he said, I can command order. He looked once more at Viola, still kneeling beside the hound she was accused of harming. And I intend to have it. Outside, morning light brightened the open door, clean and pitiless. Inside, the hall remained fixed around the small brown bottle on the table, the hound at Viola's hand, and the bride whose tears had stopped too soon. By noon, Halewick Park had become a house of closed doors. Voices lowered when Viola entered a passage. Footsteps paused behind green baize. Even the servants who had looked at her with sympathy now looked away too quickly, not because their sympathy had vanished, but because sympathy could be dangerous when a great family needed someone small enough to blame. Viola returned to the blue chamber after the scene in the lower hall and found the room no longer comforting. The primroses seemed too bright. The clean counterpane looked like a sheet laid over a verdict. Her work basket sat on the table where a maid had returned it, neat, harmless, and false. She crossed to it and lifted the lid with steady hands. Thread. Scissors. A folded square of muslin. Nothing of the bottle remained, of course. Proof had been taken away. Suspicion had not. The reticule still hung from her wrist. Inside lay the torn glove and the pearl-colored thread caught in its seam. Viola removed the glove and studied it in the thin light from the window. The little thread gleamed like a whisper that refused burial. She had thought it only a loose silk pulled from Octavia's ribbon. Now, after the bottle, it felt like the beginning of a pattern. Snare. Ribbon. Hound. Bottle. Accusation. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the glove to her lap. She could remain and hope the Duke found the truth. She could wait behind his authority, grateful and silent, while everyone at Halewick measured whether her innocence was worth the inconvenience of believing it. Or she could leave before they turned her into a story without giving her a final line. A knock sounded. Viola folded the glove at once. "Come in." Lady Octavia entered in a morning gown of pale blue, serene as though the lower hall had been a tiresome misunderstanding involving weather. She closed the door gently behind her. "You have a gift for making people uncomfortable, Viola. I have been told I make very little impression. Until yesterday. Do you enjoy the improvement?" Viola stood. "What do you want?" Octavia's brows lifted. "How abrupt. One day in a duke's guest chamber and you speak as if you own furniture. What do you want?" The smile thinned. "To help you. That must be exhausting." Octavia looked around the room, touching the back of a chair with one gloved finger. "You should be grateful His Grace has a taste for inquiry. Another man would have sent you away this morning. Would you have preferred that?" "I would have preferred you never put yourself where this could happen." Viola looked at her. "Near Thorn, you mean?" Octavia's eyes sharpened. "Near notice." The honesty of it startled both of them. For a moment, the air between them lost its perfume. Octavia recovered first. "You were always safer behind me." "I don't say that cruelly." "You say very few things cruelly, if one judges only by sound. And you say very many foolish things lately, if one judges by consequence." She stepped closer. "Listen carefully. The Duke has not saved you. He has delayed the moment when others will decide what you are. There is a difference." Viola felt the truth in that, and hated Octavia for using truth like a pin. "His Grace said he does not believe me capable of cruelty. Men say many noble things when they are watched. He was watched when he said it." "Yes. And now he must live with it." Octavia's voice softened. "The Dowager is speaking with him even now. Mr. Calder remains in the library. My father's arrangements will not dissolve because a hound sulked and a poor cousin looked tragic. Do not call him a sulking hound." Octavia's gaze flickered with something like contempt. "There. That is exactly what I mean. You show too much feeling in the wrong direction. Perhaps I have seen too little feeling in the right one. Be careful. You have said that before. And you have not learned." Octavia came close enough that her next words dropped beneath the door's hearing. "If you speak of the woods, you will be asked why you were there. If you speak of the ribbon, you will be asked why you kept it. If you speak of Thorn, you will be asked why you concealed your acquaintance with him. Every answer makes you look worse." "I merely look distressed." Viola's fingers tightened around the glove behind her skirt. Octavia was right. That was the cage. Truth did not always open doors for women without rank. Sometimes it only proved they had been somewhere they should not have been. "Why are you afraid of him?" Viola asked. Octavia blinked. "Of whom?" "The Duke." A faint laugh. "My dear Viola, no woman with sense is afraid of becoming Duchess of Wycliffe." "That is not what I asked." Octavia's face changed. For one unguarded instant, Viola saw strain beneath the polish. Not guilt alone. Need. Fear. A hunger sharpened by debt, expectation, and the terror of returning to London unchosen. Then Octavia turned away. "You understand nothing." "Then explain it." "To you?" Octavia picked up her shawl from the chair. "No. I don't explain hunger to someone who has made a virtue of crumbs." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Do not mistake the Duke's hesitation for devotion. If he truly meant to choose truth over convenience, he would have done it already." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Viola remained still. The words spread through her like cold ink. If he truly meant to choose truth over convenience, he would have done it already. Downstairs, in the library, Alaric Streetmore stood before the long windows while his mother spoke in the tone she used when she believed the world had become unreasonable and would submit if addressed with sufficient elegance. "You are not being asked to condemn Miss Fairbourne," the dowager said. "You are being asked to contain damage." Mr. Calder sat at the writing table with a portfolio closed before him, his narrow hands folded. Lady Octavia was absent, but her future occupied the room like a fourth witness. "Damage," Alaric repeated. "A hound sickened, a bottle found, a household unsettled, and a county ready to invent filth by supper." "Yes, Alaric." "Damage. And your remedy is to proceed as if nothing has happened." "My remedy is to prevent a passing disturbance from destroying an alliance that was negotiated with care. Marriage is not a tarpaulin thrown over a stain. No. It is a structure. It protects more than sentiment." Her voice lowered. "Merrow's connection matters. His support in the Lords matters. His daughter's dowry matters. Your father left dignity, but not infinite liquidity. You know that better than anyone. Do not use my father's failures to select my wife." The dowager flinched. It was slight, but he saw it. Mr. Calder looked at the portfolio. Silence filled the space his words had cut. When the dowager spoke again, she had made herself colder. "Then let us speak plainly. If you publicly reject Lady Octavia now, after the Hounds humiliated her and after Miss Fairbourne became the centre of speculation, society will not praise your discernment. It will say a poor dependent turned your head in one afternoon. It will say the Duke of Wycliffe cannot govern his house, his animals, or his mother. It will say Lady Octavia was insulted under your roof. If Lady Octavia has done nothing, truth will not injure her." "Truth?" The dowager's laugh was quiet and bitter. "You are old enough to know that truth arrives late and gossip dines early." He did know it. That was the trouble. Alaric looked toward the windows, beyond which the south lawn lay bright and deceptively calm. He thought of Viola kneeling beside Thorn, her hand offered but not imposed. He thought of the question she had asked him in front of everyone. "Do you believe I am capable of cruelty?" He had answered honestly. But honesty was not enough. "Not yet. I require time," he said. The dowager seized upon the concession. "Then take it wisely. Host the private family announcement this evening as planned. Not a public betrothal. A simple acknowledgement of continued intention. That will steady the house while you pursue whatever inquiry you deem necessary." Mr. Calder finally spoke. "It would reassure Lord Merrow, Your Grace. No settlements need be executed tonight. Merely an expression that the understanding remains undisturbed." Alaric turned. Undisturbed. The word tasted false. The dowager stepped closer. "Give me one evening. Give Lady Octavia dignity before the guests. Give yourself time without inviting scandal to define the interval. And Miss Fairbourne. She remains here under your protection, since you insist upon it. Under suspicion. Under inquiry." His jaw tightened. That was the language of compromise. It was also the language by which innocent people were kept standing in doorways while their betters decided how much justice could be afforded. He knew it. Yet he did not yet have proof. A duke could command rooms, dismiss guests, and halt arrangements. He could not make a truth appear whole because his instinct demanded it. "No announcement of betrothal," he said. "No signatures. No promise beyond civility." The dowager exhaled as though she had won something larger. "A private acknowledgement, then." "A delay," he said. "Nothing more." But delay, once spoken in a great house, changed shape as it travelled. Viola learned of it not from the Duke, but from the corridor outside the library, where she had come with the torn glove hidden in her reticule and the pearl thread burning against her conscience. She had meant to ask for an audience. She had meant, perhaps, to give him the thread and let consequence do what it would. Then she heard the dowager's voice through the not quite closed door. "This evening will steady matters. Lady Octavia must be seen as still chosen." Still chosen. Viola stood very still. A footman at the far end of the passage pretended not to see her. Inside, the Duke said something too low for her to catch. Mr. Calder answered. The dowager's voice came again. Miss Fairbourne need not attend. Her absence will be kinder to everyone. Viola stepped back. Something quiet broke inside her, not loudly enough to make anyone turn, but completely enough that she felt the new shape of herself at once. The Duke had not condemned her. He had not believed her cruel. He had protected her from dismissal. Yet he would allow another room to gather, another arrangement to stand, another version of events to harden while she waited elsewhere like an inconvenient stain under a rug. Octavia was right. Delay could wound as cleanly as accusation. Viola returned to the blue chamber without seeing the stairs. She moved with the calm of a woman who had discovered there was only one door left and it led away. The old maidservant who had travelled with the Merrow party, Mrs. Ansell, was mending linen near the servants' passage when Viola found her. "Mrs. Ansell," Viola said, "would you help me reach Grey Mere before dark?" The older woman looked up sharply. "Miss Viola, that's your aunt's cottage?" "Yes." "Does her ladyship know?" "No." Mrs. Ansell studied her face and asked no useless question. "Then we had best use the side yard before the carriages are called round." Viola returned once more to the blue chamber. She packed almost nothing. A change of linen. Her small purse. The torn glove. The pearl thread. No gowns that had been lent by Octavia. No shawl that could be claimed back with a smile. Before leaving, she stood beside the work basket where the bottle had supposedly been found. Then she opened it, took out the neat folded square of muslin, and placed it on the table as if marking the end of a life she had no intention of returning to. At the door, she paused. The room had been kind to her. That did not make it safe. In the side yard, Mrs. Ansell waited near a small covered carriage used for errands. The sky had begun to lower toward evening. From the kennels came a sudden commotion, a bark, then a man's startled cry. Viola turned. Across the yard, Bracken burst into view, dark body moving with determined grace, a length of loose lead trailing behind him. "Bracken," she whispered. The hound stopped when he saw her, then came straight to the carriage and placed himself beside the step. Mrs. Ansell crossed herself under her breath. "Well, seems you have an escort." Viola looked back at Halewick Park. Its windows burned gold in the sinking sun. Somewhere inside, the Duke was choosing delay. Somewhere inside, Octavia was being prepared to remain chosen. Viola climbed into the carriage with the hound at her feet and the torn glove in her hand. "Drive," she said. Her voice did not break. As the carriage rolled away from the side yard, Bracken trotting beside it like a judgment no one had dismissed, Viola Fairbourne left Halewick Park before it could decide what she was worth. Grey Mere had never looked like refuge from the road. It sat at the edge of a narrow lane for miles from Halewick Park, a modest brick cottage with ivy at one wall, a sagging garden gate, and two front windows that caught the last of the evening light as if trying to be cheerful on insufficient means. To Viola, who reached it with dust on her hem, a torn glove in her reticule, and Bracken pacing beside the carriage like a dark oath, it looked like the first honest place she had seen all day. Her aunt, Mrs. Edith Sallow, opened the door herself before the driver could knock. She was a small widow with silver hair pinned severely beneath a lace cap, and she took in the errand carriage, Mrs. Ansell, Viola's pale face, and the Duke's hound with one swift glance. "Well," she said, "either you have been ruined, rescued, or both. Come in before the lane decides for us." Viola stepped down. Bracken waited until her shoes touched the ground, then moved between her and the road. Mrs. Sallow looked at him. "And who is this very large opinion?" "Bracken," Viola said. "He belongs to the Duke of Wycliffe." "Does he know that?" Viola almost smiled, but it faltered. "I am no longer certain what anyone knows." Her aunt's sharp face softened at once. She did not embrace Viola in the lane. Mrs. Sallow understood the weight of eyes even where few eyes existed. She drew her niece inside, ordered Mrs. Ansell to the kitchen for tea, and allowed Bracken to enter after only a brief inspection of his paws. "If a duke objects, he may write," she said. The front parlour was small, clean, and plainly furnished. No portraits judged from gilt frames. No footman waited to turn pain into gossip. A little fire burned in the grate, though the evening was mild, and the chair nearest it held a mending basket instead of a strategy. Viola sat because her aunt pointed, not because her knees had given way. Bracken lowered himself across the threshold, facing the door. Mrs. Sallow watched him, then watched Viola. "Begin with the part that made you leave before dark." Viola looked at her hands. "They found my liniment bottle near Thorn after he became unwell." Thorn being another hound, not a gentleman with an unfortunate name. "Another hound. Good. Continue." Viola did. Not all at once. The words came in careful pieces. The visit to Halewick Park. The Dowager's arrangement. Octavia's perfect courtesy. The hound's growl. Thorn and Bracken at her feet. The accusation in the lower hall. The Duke's refusal to condemn her. His delay. The private acknowledgement meant to keep Octavia chosen while proof was gathered elsewhere. Mrs. Sallow listened without interruption, which was the reason Viola found herself saying more than she intended. At last, she opened the reticule and laid the torn glove on her aunt's tea table. The little pearl thread glimmered along the split seam. "I found this caught in it." Mrs. Sallow leaned closer. "That is not from your gown." "No, nor from any glove worth wearing. It looks like Lady Octavia's ribbon." "Looks like." "I cannot prove it." "Proof," her aunt said, "is a word powerful people use when they wish to delay believing what would inconvenience them." Viola closed her eyes briefly. "He said he did not believe me capable of cruelty." "And then?" "And then he permitted them to steady the house by leaving Octavia's arrangement standing." "Ah." Mrs. Sallow leaned back. "The old disease. Men mistake patience for justice when the pain belongs to someone else." The word struck so close that Viola had to look away. "He protected me as much as he could." "No, my dear. He protected you as much as he chose to before it cost him peace." Bracken lifted his head at the sound of wheels outside. Viola froze. Her aunt rose and moved to the window with surprising speed. "A horseman. Alone. Dark coat. He sits as if the road insulted him and he intends to correct it." Viola stood. "The Duke?" "Of course it is. Dukes rarely allow their hounds to make independent social calls." Bracken was already on his feet. He did not bark. He waited, body alert, eyes on the door. Mrs. Sallow looked at Viola. "Do you wish to receive him?" The question itself nearly undid her. At Halewick Park, doors had opened or closed around her. "Here," someone asked. "I will speak with him," Viola said, "but not alone." "Sensible girl." Mrs. Sallow went to the door before the knock finished. "Your Grace," she said from the threshold, in a tone that suggested dukes were common enough in lanes and she had never been impressed by weather either. "Mrs. Sallow, I presume." "You presume correctly. If you have come for your hound, he is here. If you have come for my niece, she will decide whether she is available." A pause followed. Viola could imagine his face, composed and unreadable in the dusk. "I have come to ask," he said. "Not command." Mrs. Sallow turned her head. "Improvement already, Viola." He touched Viola's face despite everything. "Aunt." "You may stand at the gate, Your Grace. The parlor is small, and I dislike large apologies in little rooms." A moment later, Viola stepped out into the front garden with her aunt near the door and Bracken at her side. The Duke stood beyond the low gate, hat in hand, his horse tethered behind him. Dust marked his boots. His control remained, but it had lost its polish. For the first time since she had met him, he looked less like the master of Halewick Park than a man who had ridden too fast after discovering authority could arrive late. "Miss Fairbourne," he said. "Your Grace." He looked at Bracken. The hound did not cross to him. Something flickered in the Duke's eyes, not anger. Acceptance, perhaps. "I see he has made his preference plain." He followed the carriage. "Yes." After breaking from the kennel yard with an efficiency that has embarrassed 2 grooms and confirmed Mr. Hobbs' view that Bracken tolerates command only when he agrees with it. Despite herself, Viola felt the edge of a smile. It vanished quickly. You should take him back. I will, if he chooses to come. He is yours. That has become a less simple statement than it was yesterday. Silence settled between them. It was not the suffocating silence of Halewick. It had air in it. Cricket sounded near the hedge. Somewhere behind Viola, Mrs. Ansell moved in the kitchen. Ordinary sounds. Honest sounds. The Duke rested one hand on the top of the gate but did not open it. I owe you an apology. For what, Your Grace? For mistaking delay for wisdom. Viola's fingers tightened at her skirt. He had found the wound exactly. She had expected defense. Explanation. The argument of a powerful man who wished to remain blameless while regretting discomfort. Instead, he named the thing. It made anger harder and pain clearer. You said you did not believe me cruel, she said. I meant it. Then you allowed a room to prepare itself as if Lady Octavia remained untouched by the possibility of guilt while I remained elsewhere under inquiry. His jaw tightened. Yes. The answer was bare. No silk. No polished excuse. I told myself proof required time. That was true. I told myself keeping the arrangement formally undisturbed would prevent gossip from devouring the inquiry. That may also have been true. But it was not the whole truth. What was the whole truth? That I asked you to stand in uncertainty because it was easier than forcing my house to stand in it with you. The words entered her slowly. Viola looked down at Bracken, whose head rested against her gown. The Hound trusted without language. Human beings made trust difficult because they had so many words with which to delay it. Lady Octavia came to my room, she said. The Duke went still. When? Before I left. She told me truth would make me look worse. She was not entirely wrong. What did she say? That if I spoke of the woods, I would be asked why I was there. If I spoke of the ribbon, I would be asked why I kept it. If I spoke of Thorn, I would be asked why I had concealed my acquaintance with him. His eyes sharpened. The ribbon. Viola reached into her reticule. Her aunt made a small sound from the doorway, but did not stop her. Viola unfolded the torn glove and stepped toward the gate. Bracken moved with her. She held the glove out. The Duke did not take it at once. May I? He asked. That small permission struck her more deeply than it should have. She nodded. He took the glove carefully, as if the poor torn thing deserved the same attention as a legal seal. His thumb paused near the pearl thread. This was caught at the snare. At first, I thought it was only mud and torn leather. Tonight I saw the thread properly. I found another strip near the iron teeth that evening. I was foolish enough to keep it. Why? Because I knew one day someone would ask me to prove that what I saw had happened. Her voice grew quieter. And because part of me knew no one would ask unless I already looked guilty. He closed his hand around the glove, then opened it again, as if reminding himself that evidence was not ownership. I will have this compared with Lady Octavia's riding ribbons. She will explain it. Likely. Your mother will protect her. Likely. Mr. Calder will make it sound unimportant. Almost certainly. Viola looked at him then. Then why should I return? The question was the heart of it. It stood between them in the dusk, larger than rank, larger than apology, larger than the Hound at her feet. The Duke looked toward the cottage, where Mrs. Sallow stood like a small guardian angel with no patience for dukes. Then he looked back at Viola. I have no right to ask you to return for me. No, so I will not. Then why are you here? To tell you that Peter is afraid. Mr. Hobb is ashamed. Thorn is recovering, but he still flinches at Lady Octavia's voice. And my house is full of people who saw pieces of the truth but have spent their lives learning that pieces are dangerous unless a powerful person permits them to become whole. Viola's anger faltered. Peter's pale face rose in her mind. The chambermaid's frightened kindness. Mrs. Vale's watchful silence. Thorn's tired head on the blanket. The Duke continued, if you do not return, I will still pursue the matter. I will not allow you to be named guilty. But if you choose to return, it should be for the truth they tried to take from all of you. Not because I ask it. Viola looked at the glove in his hand. And if I refuse? Then I will send Bracken back when he consents to be sent, ensure Mrs. Ansell suffers no dismissal for aiding you, and call here tomorrow if your aunt permits it. You would not compel me. I came to ask, not command. There it was again, quieter this time and more costly. Viola felt it settle somewhere beneath her ribs. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of a place where trust might one day stand. Mrs. Sallow called from the doorway, ask him about the old maidservant, Viola. Men remember honor better when assigned details. The Duke's mouth almost moved. Mrs. Ansell will not be punished. Nor Peter. I have already given orders. Orders can be undone by mothers, Mrs. Sallow said. Mine will not be. Viola studied him. In the fading light, he looked tired. Still proud. Still controlled. But no longer untouched by the harm control could do. Keep the glove tonight, she said. His fingers closed gently around it. You trust me with it? No, his eyes lifted to hers. Not yet. I trust that you know what it will mean if you fail with it. He bowed his head once. That is fair. Bracken rose and walked to the gate. The Duke opened it at last, but the hound did not pass through. He looked back at Viola. The choice, absurdly and perfectly, was hers again. Viola touched Bracken's head once, barely more than a brush of fingers. Go with him. Bracken stared at her for a long moment, then stepped through the gate to the Duke's side. Alaric Streetmore looked down at the hound, then back at Viola. May I call tomorrow? Mrs. Sallow answered before Viola could. At a decent hour, with a better apology if you find one. This time the Duke did almost smile. I shall attempt both. Viola remained by the gate as he mounted and turned his horse toward Halewick Park, Bracken trotting beside him through the deepening dusk. She watched until the lane bent and swallowed them. Then she looked at her empty hand, where the torn glove had been. It felt dangerous to have let it go. It felt more dangerous to hope he might be worthy of carrying it. Halewick Park received the Duke before the house had finished pretending he had not been missed. Alaric rode into the stable yard with Bracken at his horse's flank and Viola's torn glove folded inside his coat, where its poor leather seemed heavier than any document Mr. Calder had brought from London. The first groom came forward, then stopped when he saw the Duke's face. Where is Peter? Alaric asked. At the lower kennels, your grace. Send him to the old tack room. Mr. Hobb as well. Quietly. The groom bowed and hurried off. Bracken did not follow the horse toward the stalls. He stood in the yard, head lifted toward the house, as if measuring the walls by scent and disapproval. You and I are agreed, Alaric murmured. But we shall require more than instinct. The old tack room smelled of leather, saddle soap, and years of work done by hands no guest ever noticed. Alaric chose it because no one came there for elegance, and because men who feared drawing rooms sometimes told the truth more readily among bridles and worn boots. Peter arrived first, cap twisting in his hands. Mr. Hobb followed, shoulders bent, his weathered face troubled. A lady's maid named Cresswell, who served Lady Octavia during the visit, was brought by Mrs. Vale 10 minutes later, pale with alarm and rigid with the terror of a servant asked to speak about her betters. Alaric stood beside the narrow window. No one will be dismissed for answering me honestly. No one will be sent away without wages. No one's family will suffer for words spoken in this room. You have my name on it. Cresswell's lips trembled. Peter stared at the floor. Mr. Hobb said, Your Grace, folk like us don't always know when truth is wanted and when it is only being tested. Then know it now, Alaric said. It is wanted. He placed the torn glove on a folded horse blanket. The pearl thread caught the dim light. Miss Fairbourne gave me this. It tore near the latch by the kennels. There is a thread caught in the seam. I believe it may match something belonging to Lady Octavia. Cresswell's gaze flicked toward the glove, then away. Too quickly. Alaric saw it. Miss Cresswell. She swallowed. Her ladyship's riding ribbons are pearl silk, Your Grace. A set of 4. One was shortened last week after it frayed. Who shortened it? I did. At her request? Yes, Your Grace. Where is the remaining piece? Cresswell's hands closed together. Gone, Your Grace. Gone where? I don't know. Peter made a small sound, then stopped. Alaric turned to him. Speak. The boy looked as if he would rather face any hound in England. I saw a piece of ribbon near the stable wall the same week Thorn came back limping. I thought it was nothing. Ladies drop things. Did you pick it up? No, Your Grace. Miss Fairbourne did. I saw her bend after Lady Octavia called for the carriage. I thought maybe she meant to return it. Mr. Hobbs shook his head slowly. There was ribbon on the snare too, Your Grace. Not tied proper. Caught like it had been torn passing close. Cresswell looked near tears. I don't say her ladyship said anything. I wouldn't say that. I only know she came back from walking with mud on her hem and told me if anyone asked, she'd been nowhere near the lower path. When? Alaric asked. 3 weeks ago. The room seemed to narrow around the date. 3 weeks. The snare. The torn glove. Thorn's fear. Viola's silence. Alaric felt the shape of his own mistake harden into something unforgivable. He had asked for proof, and proof had been standing all around him in frightened pieces, waiting for permission to assemble. And the bottle, he said. Cresswell flinched. I didn't put it there. That was not my question. I saw Lady Octavia come from the East Passage before breakfast. She had no reason to be there. When I asked if she needed me, she said Miss Fairbourne had mislaid something and I was not to trouble myself. Later the bottle was found. Peter lifted his head. Your Grace, I saw Lady Octavia near Thorn yesterday before dinner. Only for a moment. She stood by the kennel yard when she thought no one was about. Thorn backed away from her. Bracken growled, low-like. She said something. I couldn't hear it. Then she saw me and smiled. Smiled, Alaric repeated. Peter nodded, miserable. I wished I hadn't seen anything. That, Alaric said quietly, is precisely why such things survive. By late afternoon, the house had changed its costume again. The Dowager had ordered the crimson drawing-room prepared for what she called a private acknowledgement, though the word private had stretched to include Mr. Calder, 2 county ladies, the rector and his wife, Mrs. Vale in attendance, Lord Merrow's travelling secretary, and enough household presence at the edges to ensure that whatever happened would spread in the correct form. Flowers had been placed on the pianoforte. Decanters stood untouched on the side table. Lady Octavia wore ivory silk with pearl ribbons at her sleeves, and her face had been arranged into the expression of a woman forgiving an entire house for having inconvenienced her. I hope His Grace is not too distressed by Miss Fairbourne's abrupt departure, she said to the Dowager, just loudly enough for the rector's wife to hear. It was perhaps kinder that she withdraw. Poor Viola feels things so deeply, and feeling can become confusion when encouraged. The Dowager touched her hand. You have behaved with admirable restraint, my dear. I only wish to restore peace. Mr. Calder gave a dry nod. Peace is often restored by proceeding with steadiness. At the doorway, Alaric paused long enough to hear the sentence and dislike every syllable of it. Bracken stood beside him, though no one had permitted the hound indoors. Alaric had not asked permission. The drawing-room fell silent when they entered. Octavia's eyes moved to the hound and away again. It was swift, but not swift enough. Your Grace, she said, lowering her head. I am pleased to see Bracken recovered from his adventure. Bracken was never unwell. No. Of course not. I only meant his distress. His judgment appears intact. The Dowager rose. Alaric, surely the hound need not join us. On the contrary. He has been a more reliable witness than several people in this house. The first crack appeared in the room. It passed through posture, not sound. Mr. Calder's brows drew together. Octavia's hand tightened once on the pearl ribbon at her sleeve. The Duke saw the ribbon. He also saw where it had been mended. Before we proceed, the Dowager said, I trust you have come to your senses regarding this unfortunate interruption. I have come to several. Then perhaps you will reassure Lady Octavia that your household remains committed to civility. Civility, yes. Fossard, no. Octavia lifted her eyes, bright with practiced hurt. Am I to be tried, Your Grace? I had hoped the humiliation of yesterday might suffice. Humiliation is not proof of innocence. Nor is a hound's dislike proof of guilt. Agreed. He took the torn glove from inside his coat and laid it on the table. Octavia looked at it, then at him. Her face remained composed, but Bracken gave a low sound deep in his chest. Miss Fairbourne gave me this last night at Grey Mere. The dowager's eyes flashed. You went to her? Yes. Alone? At her aunt's gate, with her aunt present. You may relieve yourself of that scandal. A faint colour rose in the dowager's face. Octavia's voice softened. How touching! Viola has always been skilled at inspiring rescue. She did not ask to be rescued. Alaric's voice hardened. That is the point I was late in understanding. Silence. He turned to Mrs. Vale. Send a note to Grey Mere. It is to be put into Miss Fairbourne's hand and no other. Write exactly this. Mrs. Vale moved to the small desk at once. Alaric spoke without looking away from Octavia. Come only if you choose. I will not ask trust of you again until I have earned it. The scratching of the pen seemed loud enough to cut the air. Octavia laughed softly. Your Grace, this is becoming theatrical. No, he said. It is becoming honest. Then he looked to the door, where Peter waited pale and terrified beside Mr. Hobb and Cresswell. An honesty, Lady Octavia, has been waiting outside because rank taught it to fear the room. Mrs. Vale's note reached Grey Mere just as the light began to thin over the lane, and Viola knew before the seal was broken that it had come from Halewick Park. Not because the paper was fine, though it was. Not because the footman wore Wycliffe livery, though he did. She knew because Bracken was not at the gate. The absence of the hound felt like a question sent ahead of the words. Mrs. Sallow received the note, examined the seal, then handed it to Viola without comment. That was one of her aunt's finest kindnesses. She did not pretend not to be curious, but she allowed dignity room to breathe before curiosity entered. Viola opened the note beside the parlor window. The message was brief. Come only if you choose. I will not ask trust of you again until I have earned it. There was no signature. It did not need one. The hand was controlled, upright, and spare, like the man himself. Viola read it once. Then again. Mrs. Sallow stood near the mantel with her arms folded. Well. He asks me to come. No. He asks you to choose. Viola looked up. The distinction mattered. It should not have mattered so much, but it did. All her life, she had been summoned, included, sent for, dismissed, accommodated, tolerated, and directed. Choice had arrived rarely, and usually dressed as a trap. He says he will not ask trust until he has earned it. A useful sentence, if he intends to live long enough to prove it. Viola folded the note carefully. Peter may be made to speak. Then he will need someone in that room who knows the cost of speaking from below. And Thorn. The hound too, yes. Mrs. Sallow's expression softened, though she disguised it by adjusting the fire screen. But do not go back for the Duke. Viola touched the reticule at her wrist. It was lighter without the torn glove, and somehow more accusing. I will not. Good. Go back for yourself, then. And if yourself happens to include a frightened kennel boy and a limping hound, I shall not object. Viola changed without haste. That was important. She did not put on the pale gown Octavia had once said made her look almost pretty if one did not expect too much. She did not borrow a ribbon, though Mrs. Ansell offered one. She chose her plain grey gown, brushed the dust from the hem, smoothed her cuffs, and pinned her hair without ornament. When she looked in the mirror, she did not see a heroine. She saw a woman with tired eyes and a steady mouth who had been misnamed by others long enough. Will this do? She asked. Mrs. Sallow looked her over. For battle? No. For truth? Better. The carriage from Halewick waited in a lane, but Mrs. Sallow insisted on accompanying her as far as the estate gates. I am not entering that house, her aunt said. If I do, I may say something useful, and no one invited usefulness. By the time the carriage reached Halewick Park, candles had been lit behind the lower windows. The estate looked less like a home than a ship waiting to decide whose name would be thrown overboard. Viola stepped down before the footman could fully offer his hand. Her aunt remained in the carriage, watching from beneath the brim of her bonnet. Remember, Mrs. Sallow said, gratitude is not obedience. I will remember. And if the dowager smiles, count your fingers afterward. Despite herself, Viola almost laughed. The carriage rolled toward the side turn to wait, and Viola faced the house alone. The great doors opened before she knocked. Mrs. Vale stood inside, grave and composed. Miss Fairbourne. Mrs. Vale. The housekeeper's eyes moved over Viola's plain gown, then settled on her face with approval so slight it could have been mistaken for nothing. His Grace is in the crimson drawing-room. Her Grace requested that you be shown first to the morning parlour. Why? She did not say. Then I prefer the drawing-room. A small pause. Very good, miss. They had crossed only half the entrance hall when the Dowager Duchess appeared at the foot of the stairs, violet silk severe beneath the candlelight. She looked at Viola as if a misplaced object had returned itself to the wrong shelf. Miss Fairbourne. How dramatic of you to answer a note so quickly. Viola curtsied. Your Grace. You misunderstand the purpose of your return if you believe it improves your position. I did not return to improve my position. Then why are you here? Viola lifted her head. The hall seemed very large around them, polished and listening. To return truth to the people blamed for its absence. The dowager's eyes narrowed. A rehearsed sentence. No. Merely a necessary one. You have been encouraged beyond wisdom. Perhaps. But not beyond memory. For the first time, the dowager's composure showed a hairline crack. She descended the last step. You are still a dependent young woman with no fortune, no title, and no protector beyond the temporary fascination of a man who dislikes being contradicted by his dogs. Viola felt the insult strike the old places, but it did not enter as deeply. Then I should be easy to dismiss, Your Grace. Yet you came to stop me in the hall. Mrs. Vale became very still. The dowager did not look at her. Do not mistake insolence for courage. I am trying not to mistake silence for virtue. The words were quiet. They changed the air. The dowager's face hardened. You will regret being made visible. Viola thought of the courtyard, the lower hall, the blue chamber, the side yard, the road to Grey Mere, and Bracken trotting beside the carriage like judgment in the shape of loyalty. I already have, she said. But I regret being misrepresented more. A door opened at the far end of the hall. The Duke stood there, dark against the glow of the drawing-room behind him. His gaze moved from his mother to Viola, and something in his expression altered at the sight of her plain grey gown. Not disappointment. Recognition. He crossed the hall, stopping at a distance proper enough for every eye and close enough that his voice need not carry. Miss Fairbourne. Your Grace. Will you stand where they can see you? The question passed through her more gently than command and more dangerously than reassurance. He was not asking whether she was brave. He was asking whether she would choose exposure. Viola looked toward the drawing-room. She could hear voices within. Octavia's, smooth as cream. Mr. Calder's dry murmur. Peter's silence was louder because she imagined it. I will, she said. On one condition. The Duke's eyes did not flicker. Name it. You will not speak all of it for me. The dowager made a soft, incredulous sound. The Duke did not look away from Viola. No, for one terrible second, she thought he refused. Then he said, I will not steal your voice to prove I have found mine. The words were too quiet for the room behind him, but the dowager heard them. Viola felt their weight settle. Not romance. Not yet. Something stronger at that moment. Respect, standing upright between them. Then I will enter, Viola said. The Duke inclined his head and stepped aside. He did not offer his arm. He did not touch her back. He did not make a spectacle of protection. He opened the door and allowed her to walk through first. Every conversation in the crimson drawing room died as Viola crossed the threshold. The space looked prepared for triumph. Flowers on the pianoforte. Candles burning in perfect ranks. Mr. Calder beside his portfolio. The rector and his wife seated as unwilling witnesses. 2 county ladies fixed in anticipation. Mrs. Vale remained by the door. Peter stood near the side wall, pale but present, with Mr. Hobb beside him. Cresswell, Lady Octavia's maid, kept her hands folded so tightly the knuckles showed. Bracken lay near the hearth, his head up. Thorn was not there. Not yet. Lady Octavia stood near the dowager's chair in ivory silk, the pearl ribbons at her sleeves gleaming under candlelight. Her eyes widened with just enough surprise to seem innocent. "Viola," she said softly. "You came back." "Yes." "How brave." "No," Viola said. "Necessary." Octavia's smile held. "Necessary for whom?" "For those who were expected to bear blame quietly." Mr. Calder shifted. The dowager entered behind Viola, her voice cold. "Miss Fairbourne has returned under the impression that feeling strongly is equivalent to evidence." The Duke moved to the mantel. "Miss Fairbourne has returned because I asked whether she chose to stand where she could be seen." Octavia looked at him, and for the first time Viola heard strain beneath the sweetness. "Your Grace, I hope you won't allow sentiment to turn this room into a stage." It became a stage when innocence was performed and suspicion assigned roles. The room tightened. Peter looked as if he might faint. Viola turned toward him, not fully, only enough that he knew she had seen him. "Peter," she said gently, "you owe me nothing. Not even courage. But if you speak, speak only what you know." The boy swallowed. The Duke's gaze softened by a fraction. Mr. Hobb nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Octavia's eyes flashed. "How touching. You coach servants now?" Viola faced her. "No. I remind them they are people before they are useful." The rector's wife drew in a breath. Lady Octavia's smile began, at last, to fray. "You speak as though you are above usefulness." "I speak as someone tired of seeing usefulness treated as permission to be used." The words landed harder than Viola expected. Perhaps because she had not raised her voice. Perhaps because, for once, she did not make her pain convenient for others. The dowager stepped to the center of the room. "Then speak, Miss Fairbourne. Let us hear what a companion thinks she knows." Every face turned toward Viola. The old fear rose. It would have been easier to look at the Duke, to let his power steady her. Instead, she looked at Bracken by the hearth, then at Peter, then at the pearl ribbons on Octavia's sleeves. At last, she lifted her chin. "I know where Thorn was hurt," she said. "I know what was caught in the iron. And I know who has been relying on my silence." The room did not breathe after Viola spoke. It seemed to hold itself around her words, around the pearl ribbons at Lady Octavia's sleeves, around Peter's pale face near the side wall, around the Duke standing by the mantel with the torn glove on the table before him. No one moved first because movement would have meant choosing a side. Viola understood that now. Silence was not neutral. It merely waited to see where power would settle. Lady Octavia recovered with a small, sorrowful smile. "Viola, dear, you sound feverish. I know you've endured a difficult day, but this is becoming unkind." "No," Viola said. Her voice was low, but it carried. "Unkindness began before I entered this room." The Dowager Duchess drew herself upright. "You will speak with restraint." "I am trying to, Your Grace. That is why I am speaking plainly." The Duke did not interrupt. He stood where she could see him, not before her, not between her and the room. That mattered more than she had expected. Viola turned to the table and placed her hand near the torn glove, though she did not touch it. 3 weeks ago, Lady Octavia and I walked near the south path. She wished to return because the grass was damp. I fell behind and heard a sound from the wood below the stable wall. Thorn had been caught in an iron snare near the lower kennels. A murmur moved through the room. Mr. Hobbs' face tightened with grief. Viola continued before anyone could make her memory small. I freed him. I tore my glove on the latch and cut my wrist. I did not tell anyone because I had gone beyond the proper path, because I knew how that would be used, and because I had found something caught near the iron. The Duke lifted the glove. The pearl thread gleamed against the damaged leather. This, he said, was caught in the seam. Mr. Hobb confirmed similar silk was found at the snare. Miss Cresswell confirms Lady Octavia's pearl riding ribbons were shortened after that walk. Lady Octavia's colour rose. A ribbon? Half the ladies in England own pearl silk. Am I to be condemned by millinery? No, the Duke said. You are to be questioned by pattern. Peter made a faint sound. Viola looked toward him. Peter. The boy's cap twisted in his hands. Miss, I only what you know, she said. Nothing more. The kindness steadied him more than command could have. He swallowed. I saw Lady Octavia near the stable wall that week, Your Grace. Thorn came close, and she raised her hand. He backed away like he expected hurt. I did not see her set the snare. I swear I did not. But I saw Miss Fairbourne later with mud on her hem and Thorn limping beside her, quiet as could be. Octavia's smile became brittle. A frightened boy invents what a duke wishes to hear. Mr. Hobb stepped forward before the Duke could speak. Beg pardon, my lady, but Thorn does not limp quiet for strangers. Not when he is hurt. He would sooner pull away than lean near a hand he does not trust. The rector's wife pressed her hand to her lips. Mr. Calder looked at the portfolio before him as if hoping the law of paper might rescue the law of conduct. The dowager turned her eyes on Cresswell. You would do well to remember whose service supports your future. Cresswell flinched. The Duke's voice cooled the room. Miss Cresswell's future is not in your hands tonight. The maid's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Her ladyship came from the east passage before breakfast, Your Grace. Near Miss Fairbourne's chamber. She told me not to trouble myself. Later, the bottle was found in Miss Fairbourne's work basket. I did not put it there. Octavia stepped back. It was only one step, yet it broke the picture she had held all evening. This is outrageous. Servants will say anything when frightened. Yes, Viola said. They often say nothing at all. Octavia turned on her. And you would know, wouldn't you? Always listening from corners. Always gathering crumbs. Always making virtue out of having nothing else. The insult rang too nakedly to be called concern. The room heard it as it was. The dowager moved quickly. Lady Octavia is distressed. No, mother, the Duke said. She is revealed. Octavia's eyes flashed. Revealed? By a dependent cousin who has spent years resenting me? By a kennel boy? By dogs? Bracken rose beside the hearth. At the door, Mrs. Vale appeared with Thorn at her side. The hound moved slowly but steadily, his dark head low, his scarred foreleg careful on the carpet. Every eye turned. Viola's heart tightened, but she did not move toward him. Not yet. The Duke looked to Mr. Hobb, who nodded once. Let them choose their distance, the Duke said. No one spoke. Bracken crossed the room first. He passed Octavia at a wide arc, not growling, not lunging, only refusing her with every line of his body. Thorn followed. When he neared Octavia, she stiffened. Her gloved hand twitched, small and quick. Thorn stopped at once. Bracken's head lifted. A low warning moved through him, restrained but unmistakable. Octavia's composure shattered at the edges. Stop this. It is grotesque. I will not be judged by beasts and a charity-bred nobody. The words fell into the room and destroyed what remained of her innocence. Viola felt them strike, but this time they did not enter. She had been called less in kinder voices. Before she could answer, the Duke moved from the mantel. In my house, he said, each word controlled, cruelty is not breeding. The dowager went pale. Alaric. No, he did not raise his voice. You arranged a marriage as if a duchess were an answer to ledgers and pride. You dismissed warnings because they came from animals, servants, and a woman without fortune. That ends tonight. Octavia's mouth trembled with fury. You cannot mean to cast me off over this. There is nothing to cast off. No betrothal exists. No settlement will be signed. The understanding is withdrawn. Mr. Calder rose halfway. Your Grace, Lord Merrow will require an explanation. He shall have one. In writing. With enough restraint to spare his daughter public ruin if she leaves Halewick Park before morning and does not repeat any accusation against Miss Fairbourne, Peter, Mr. Hobb, or this household. Octavia stared at him. You would protect me with silence while condemning me with it. I protect the truth from becoming theatre beyond this room. His gaze did not soften. Do not mistake that for mercy without consequence. The dowager's voice came cold and shaking. You forget what you owe your house. I remember it at last. He turned to her. You will remove yourself from all marriage negotiations concerning me. Mrs. Vale will hold the household invitation books. The estate keys return to my authority tonight. The dower house will be prepared for you within the week. The room went utterly still. This was not a son shouting at his mother. It was a duke reclaiming a house. The dowager looked as if he had opened a door beneath her feet. You would exile me. No. I would give boundaries to power that has mistaken itself for duty. For a moment, Viola almost pitied the older woman. Almost. Then Thorn reached her. He lowered himself at Viola's feet, with his scarred foreleg resting over the edge of her skirt. Bracken settled beside him. The first time this had happened, Viola had wanted to vanish. Now she stood in the center of the crimson drawing-room and let herself be seen. The Duke turned toward the room. Miss Fairbourne did not seek attention. She did not harm Thorn. She saved him, concealed the deed at cost to herself, and returned tonight so others would not be blamed for a lie built above them. His eyes met hers, and his voice changed, not in volume, but in weight. Her worth does not depend upon whether I admire her, defend her, or ask anything of her. It existed before I had the sense to recognize it. Viola could not speak. She had expected vindication to feel like triumph. It felt more like a hand loosening around her throat. Octavia's face hardened into one last mask, but no one in the room looked to her for the story now. Mr. Calder closed his portfolio. The rector bowed his head. Cresswell wept silently. Peter stood straighter. The dowager turned away first. That was her defeat. Lady Octavia followed, ivory silk whispering like a retreating lie. When the door closed behind the Merrow party, the room remained full of what they had left behind. The Duke waited until the last echo faded. Then he took a small silver whistle from his waistcoat pocket and placed it on the table beside the torn glove. Miss Fairbourne, he said quietly, may I call at Greymere tomorrow? Viola looked down at Thorn and Bracken, then at the glove no longer hidden. Her answer came slowly, but it came clear. Yes, Your Grace. Tomorrow. The next morning, the Duke of Wycliffe came to Greymere at a proper hour, in a proper carriage, with a groom behind him, a card in his hand, and no hounds at his side. Mrs. Sallow approved of the first three things and distrusted the fourth. A man who arrives without the witnesses that exposed him is either confident or ashamed, she said, peering through the parlor curtain. Viola, seated near the fire with mending she had not touched for 10 minutes, kept her eyes on the needle. Perhaps Bracken and Thorn are resting. Perhaps dukes are too, but we are still expected to receive them. The maid brought in the card. Mrs. Sallow took it, read it as if it might contain dangerous legislation, then allowed the Duke to enter the parlor. Alaric Streetmore looked different in the low-ceilinged cottage than he had at Halewick Park. In his own house, he had seen part of the stone and lore of the place. Here, among worn chairs, faded curtains, and a tea table with one chipped cup turned carefully away from guests, his power had nowhere to spread. He had to stand inside ordinary human space and be merely a man. Viola rose. Your Grace. Miss Fairbourne. He bowed first to her aunt. Mrs. Sallow, thank you for receiving me. I have not yet decided whether I am receiving you or supervising you. I will accept either. Sensible. She sat in the chair closest to the hearth and took up her knitting with the air of a guard accepting a post. The Duke remained standing until Viola Saturday. Then he took the chair opposite, not too near, not too far. His gaze moved once to her right hand, where the glove was absent. I returned something that belongs to you. He placed a small parcel on the table. Viola knew the shape before the wrapping opened. The torn riding glove lay inside, cleaned as well as old leather could be cleaned, its split seam mended with fine, careful stitches. The repair did not disguise the damage. It honored it. Beside it rested the silver hound whistle from the drawing room. Viola touched neither. Who mended it? Mrs. Vale found the best needlewoman in the village. I asked that no attempt be made to make it look new. Why? Because it was not new when it became important. The answer moved through her quietly. Mrs. Sallow's needles clicked once, then stopped. The Duke looked at Viola directly. Before I ask for anything, I must finish what I began badly. I am sorry. Not for the scandal. Not for the discomfort of my house. For the way I allowed your dignity to remain under negotiation while I sought proof I already knew how to seek. I mistook delay for wisdom because delay cost me less than it cost you. Viola lowered her eyes to the glove. She had imagined this moment more than once during the restless night. In some imaginings, she forgave him easily and felt noble. In others, she wounded him with a sentence sharp enough to repay the hours of uncertainty. Reality offered neither satisfaction. He had failed her. He had also returned. He had named the failure without turning it into her burden. That was rarer than apology. I was angry with you, she said. You had the right. I am still angry with the habit that made it easy for you to hesitate. So am I. She looked up then. I will not be a replacement for Lady Octavia. No, his answer came at once. Nor a correction to my mother's mistake. Nor a reward for 2 loyal hounds. Nor a convenient proof that I have learned compassion. Mrs. Sallow's needles resumed, more slowly now. Viola's throat tightened. Then what am I to you, your grace? For the first time, his composure did not answer for him. Silence did. It stood between them, honest and unsmoothed. The woman I failed to see quickly enough, he said at last. The woman my house needed before it knew her name. The woman who saved what was helpless and then tried to bear the cost alone because she had been taught that truth required permission. I cannot undo that teaching. But if you allow me, I would spend my life contradicting it. Viola's hands closed in her lap. That sounds very near a proposal. It is nearer a vow. A proposal would be impertinent today unless you wished it spoken. You came prepared not to ask. I came prepared to be refused entry at the gate. Mrs. Sallow gave a satisfied hum. Improvement continues. A fragile laugh escaped Viola before she could stop it. The Duke heard it, and something in his face softened into warmth so restrained it seemed almost private. He reached toward the parcel, then paused. May I? She nodded. He lifted the silver whistle and laid it beside her hand. This is not a claim. Bracken and Thorn will come to me if I call. They will come to you because they choose to. I thought you should have a way to summon help that does not require asking whether you deserve it. Viola looked at the small silver thing. It should have felt like a gift too fine for the cottage table. Instead, it felt practical. Trust made into an object. And if I never use it? Then it will remain yours unused. You are learning to let things remain mine. His eyes held hers. I am trying. 3 weeks passed before Viola returned to Halewick Park. Not because the Duke delayed, but because he did not press. He called at Greymere twice each week, always properly, always with Mrs. Sallow present, sometimes with Bracken and Thorn waiting outside the gate as if they had opinions about the pace of courtship. The county learned the approved version of events quickly enough. Lady Octavia Merrow had left Halewick Park due to an unfortunate incompatibility of households. Lord Merrow received a letter written with such precise restraint that he could not publicly object without exposing more than he wished. Mr. Calder departed with his portfolio unopened. Cresswell was offered a place elsewhere with a character from Mrs. Vale that no one dared question. Peter remained at the kennels and began to stand straighter. Mr. Hobb took to saying that hounds had always known more than gentlemen. The Dowager Duchess removed to the Dower House within the week. She did not fall into poverty, nor was she paraded in disgrace. Such endings belong to cheap plays, not old families. Her punishment was quieter and more complete. The invitation books no longer passed through her hands. The household keys rested with Mrs. Vale under the Duke's authority. Her letters were answered with courtesy, but not obedience. In time, that courtesy became the wall she had once used against others. Viola's formal return to Halewick came on a clear morning when the lawn was bright and the old stones held no trace of the scene that had changed them. She arrived not behind a cousin, not carrying another lady's shawl, but in the Duke's carriage with Mrs. Sallow beside her and the repaired glove folded in her lap. The household stood at proper intervals. No one cheered. Viola was grateful for that. Applause would have made performance of something too deeply earned. Mrs. Vale curtsied at the door. Peter grinned from the edge of the stable yard before remembering himself. Mr. Hobb pretended to scold him and failed. Then Bracken and Thorn appeared beneath the side archway. Thorn's limp was faint now, more memory than wound. Both hounds stopped when they saw Viola. The Duke stood beside her on the courtyard stones. He held the silver whistle in his gloved hand, then offered it to her. "Would you like to call them?" Viola took it. The metal was cool against her fingers. She lifted it to her lips, then lowered it without sounding it. Across the court, Bracken and Thorn came anyway. Bracken reached her first, solemn as a judge. Thorn followed and laid himself across the edge of her skirt exactly where he had once lain when the room had called her suspect and the truth had not yet found language. Viola bent and rested her hand lightly on his head. This time, no one asked what she had done to deserve it. Months later, after a quiet wedding in the chapel at Halewick, the county began learning a new arrangement of her name. Viola Streetmore, Duchess of Wycliffe. Some mouths spoke it eagerly. Some cautiously. A few with the faint strain of people revising opinions they had once enjoyed. Viola did not correct their tone. She had no need. As Duchess, she established a small provision for servants injured in service and for the care of estate animals too old to work but too loyal to discard. It was spoken of as benevolence. She knew it was remembrance. The repaired glove remained in a small box on her writing desk, not hidden, not displayed for pity, simply kept. On mild evenings, she and Alaric walked the south path together, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. He never hurried her past the place where Thorn had been found. He never treated silence as emptiness again. One evening, standing on the pale stones of the courtyard while the sunset turned the windows gold, Alaric lifted the silver whistle and blew one clear note. Bracken and Thorn looked up from beside Viola, considered him, and did not move. Viola laughed softly. The sound crossed the courtyard without fear. Alaric looked from the hounds to his wife, and the stern line of his mouth eased into the smile most of society would never see. "Quite right," he said. "She was always the wiser choice."